Hey guys, tonight we are going to take a little trip back in time. Not just to any place, but to ancient Greece. We aren't here for the usual highlights reel, the epic battles, the birth of democracy, or even the architectural brilliance, though we'll see plenty of that. No, we're here to explore a rather unsettling, uncontradictory idea. What if, in this cradle of Western civilization, being truly, breathtakingly beautiful wasn't a gift, but a liability, a genuine, life-altering danger? You might find that in this world, your stunning looks could get you into more trouble than you could ever imagine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to see you drop a comment below with your city and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine the light. It's the first thing you notice. It's not soft or filtered. It's a brilliant, almost impossibly sharp light that makes the sky a piercing blue and the white marble of the distant temples glow with an inner light. You're standing on a dusty road just outside the walls of Athens. The air is warm and dry, carrying a complex mix of scents. The sharp tang of olive groves, the faint salt maze of the Aegean Sea on the breeze, the smell of baking bread, and something else, the slightly acrid smell of charcoal fires and 1,000 people living closely together. This is your first day. You walk towards the city gate, the deep Arlon Gate, a massive structure bustling with farmers bringing in their produce, merchants with their mules, and citizens going about their day. The chatter is a lively, musical hum of Attic Greek, a language you don't understand but can feel the rhythm of. No one here is in a particular hurry, yet there's a constant, purposeful flow of movement. As you pass through the gate and into the city proper, the streets become narrower, a maze of packed earth alleyways winding between modest, sun-baked brick houses. You have to watch your step to avoid a stray puddle of questionable origin or a discarded amphora shard. Your destination, and the heart of this entire world, is the agora, the marketplace. As you emerge from the narrow lanes into this sprawling open space, it's like the world opens up. Here, under the watchful gaze of the Acropolis high on its rock, is where Athens truly lives. You see rows of stalls under simple awnings, selling everything from figs and cheese to vibrant pottery and fine linen. The air buzzes with haggling, with gossip, with the earnest pronouncements of street corner philosophers. You see a cluster of young men gathered around an older, snub-nosed man who seems to be asking them intensely annoying questions. Could that be Socrates himself, pestering the youth of Athens into thinking? Perhaps this is the very definition of a public space, the center of commerce, politics, religion, and social life all rolled into one. It's the engine room of democracy. But as you wander, you start to feel something else beneath the vibrant surface. You feel eyes on you. It's not just casual curiosity. It's a form of assessment, of measurement. The way a potter inspects a vase for flaws, the way a buyer scrutinizes a horse. Your posture, your gait, the way you carry yourself, it's all being noted. You are a woman, and you are new here. And in this world, that means you are being judged by a set of standards you don't even know exist yet. You pass by the gymnasium, an open field where athletes are training. You notice something curious. They are slick with oil, their bodies gleaming in the sun. After their exercises, they don't wash with soap and water. Instead, they use a curved metal tool called a strigil to scrape the mixture of oil, dirt, and sweat from their skin. It's a strange, intimate act of hygiene, a reminder that this world's relationship with the body is both celebrated and very different from your own. It's a world that worships the ideal form, but the daily reality is gritty and visceral. You see inscriptions carved into the bases of statues and on stone tablets, or stelae, proclaiming laws and honoring citizens. It gives the impression of a highly literate society. Yet, how many of the people bustling around you can actually read these words? That's a question historians still fiercely debate. Some argue that literacy was confined to a tiny, wealthy elite, while others suggest a more practical, Functional literacy was common among merchants and craftsmen. The truth is likely somewhere in between, a complex tapestry of knowing and not knowing. It's a quiet reminder that what is written down, the history we receive, is almost always the story told by the powerful few, the stories of the many, especially the women who walk these same paths, are often left to silence as the sun begins to dip lower, casting long, dramatic shadows from the columns of the temple of Hephaestus. The agora begins to empty, the light softens, turning the world golden. Then purple, the air cools. You look up at the Acropolis again. It seems to float above the city, a perfect, man-made mountain of order and reason. But in the growing twilight, it also feels like a seat of judgment. The gods, you've been told, live up there, and they are always watching. You survived your first day in ancient Greece, but you have a sinking feeling that you've also just stepped onto a very large, very complicated stage, and you don't yet know your lines. That feeling of being watched, of being on a stage, doesn't fade with the daylight. If anything, it intensifies. The script you don't know, the lines you're supposed to have memorized. It turns out the most important part is written on your very own face. The perfection of the Acropolis, that man-made mountain of ideal forms, isn't just an architectural choice. It's a philosophy that permeates everything, right down to the curve of a lip and the line of a jaw. You're beginning to realize that in ancient Greece, beauty isn't just a matter of opinion, it's a matter of mathematics. You find yourself standing before a statue, not one of the grand, monumental ones, but a smaller, more human-sized Kouros, a youth carved in marble, or perhaps a core, a maiden, her stony dress falling in pleated folds. You look at her face. It's serene, calm, with a faint, almost generic smile. The archaic smile, they call it, but it's the structure of the face that captivates you. It's all about proportion, symmetry, and harmony. The face is a perfect oval. The forehead is exactly 1/3 of the face's length. The nose is another third, and the chin the final third. The eyes, large and almond shaped, are spaced precisely 1 eye-width apart. Her nose doesn't have a bridge. It descends in a perfectly straight line from her forehead, a feature so common in their art it's known as the Greek nose. Forget character lines or charming imperfections. They're aiming for geometry here. This wasn't just an artistic trend. It was a deeply held belief known as kalokagothia. It's a mouthful of a word, but the concept is simple. The belief that what is beautiful on the outside must be good and noble on the inside. A harmonious face reflects a harmonious soul. A symmetrical body reflects a balanced mind. This idea, largely credited to thinkers like Pythagoras who believed the entire cosmos was governed by mathematical ratios, turned beauty into a moral virtue. So, when people are looking at you, they are just thinking, is she pretty? They're thinking, is she good? Is she virtuous? Does her face align with the cosmic order? No pressure, right? But as you look closer at the art, at the figures painted on a red and black amphora, you notice something that clashes with your modern sensibilities. Between the perfectly shaped eyebrows of a depicted goddess, you see a faint but deliberate connecting line of dark pigment, the unibrow, and it's not just on one figure. You start seeing it everywhere once you know to look for it. In this world, a unibrow, or synophrys, was not something to be plucked away in horror. It was often considered a sign of great beauty and intelligence in women, and of virility in men. The most beautiful people were sometimes described as having their eyebrows meet in the middle. It's a fascinating, jarring detail, a small crack in the otherwise impossibly smooth facade of the Greek ideal, reminding you that their standards, while rigid, had their own unique and surprising quirks. Walking through the ruins of the Agora, you see the remnants of countless statues, most of them now bleached, uniform white, for centuries. This monochrome palette defined our image of the classical world, an elegant, sterile world of pure white marble. But this is a grand illusion. Historians and archaeologists are now in a constant, evolving debate about polychromy, the ancient art of painting statues. The evidence is overwhelming. These statues were painted, and not in subtle, muted tones. They were covered in vibrant, even gaudy colors. Hair was likely a rich yellow or deep brown. Lips were red. Eyes were detailed with colored irises and dark lashes, and their clothing was a riot of patterns and bright hues. The real debate, which is still incredibly active, is about how far this realism went. Did they just paint the statues in bright, symbolic colors, or did they try to replicate the actual skin tones of the Mediterranean people who carved them? Were these figures meant to be idealized, otherworldly beings of pure, theophor, or were they meant to look like the olive-skinned, sunken Athenians who walked past them every day? The answer likely varies from statue to statue, from era to era, but it completely shatters the image of a clean, white antiquity and replaces it with a world that was loud, colorful, and intensely alive. So now you have the blueprint, the straight nose, the symmetrical features, the full lips, the large, intelligent eyes, maybe with a unibrow for that extra touch of fashionable allure. You understand the measuring stick being used to judge you, a stick carved from mathematics and philosophy. But here's the unsettling thought that begins to creep in as you leave the agora and head back to the quiet room you've secured for the night. The goal isn't actually to meet the standard. Meeting it is dangerous. Exceeding it is a catastrophe. Because if your face is so perfect that it mirrors the divine geometry of the cosmos, you are no longer just a mortal woman. You are a statement. You are a challenge. You are, in a very real sense, claiming to be the equal of a god. And in ancient Greece, there is a special word for that kind of prideful arrogance, hubris. It is the one sin, the one ultimate transgression, that the gods on their mountain thrones are said to never forgive. Hubris, that word hangs in the air, heavier than the scent of olive oil and wine. It's not just an abstract philosophical concept. It's a living, breathing part of the social fabric. It's the ultimate cautionary tale, whispered in nurseries and declaimed in amphitheaters. And as a woman whose beauty is turning heads, you are its prime potential victim. You're beginning to understand that the Greek world operates on a delicate, almost paranoid system of balance. Balance between the gods and mortals, between the city-state and the individual, between praise and envy. To stand out is to upset that balance. You see it in the way people talk. They praise a skilled weaver, but they'll add a qualifier. Her work is almost as fine as Athena's. They admire a swift runner, but HES as fast as a follower of Hermes. There's always that careful, strategic step back from direct comparison with the divine. It's a verbal insurance policy against godly wrath. The core of this belief is that the gods of Olympus are not distant, benevolent creators. They are powerful, immortal beings with very human, and often very petty, emotions. They are prone to jealousy, vanity, and spectacular fits of rage. They demand honor, sacrifice, and, above all, the acknowledgement of their absolute superiority. To forget that, even for a moment, is to invite disaster. This is the essence of hubris. It isn't just arrogance or pride in the modern sense. It's the act of a mortal willfully overstepping their boundaries, blurring the line between the human and the divine, and nothing blurs that line more vividly, more immediately, than physical beauty. A man might have to build a temple or win an impossible battle to be accused of hubris. You just have to wake up in the morning. Your very existence, if you are beautiful enough, can be interpreted as an act of cosmic defiance. People look at you and don't just see a person. They see a potential narrative, a tragedy waiting to happen. They see Icarus flying too close to the sun, his waxen wings a metaphor for mortal ambition melting away. Your beauty is your set of waxen wings. You're at a symposium, a rare privilege for a woman who isn't a Hetaira or a court saint. You're tucked away in the corner, observing. Men are reclining on couches, drinking wine mixed with water from a large crater, and engaging in loud, passionate debate. The conversation turns to a wealthy citizen who recently commissioned a statue of himself that was, perhaps, a little too grand, a little too lifelike. The comments are laced with a particular kind of schadenfreude, a mix of admiration and anxious disapproval. He's putting on airs. One man says, "The gods will notice." Another mutters into his wine cup. This is the social policing of hubris in action. It's a collective, low-grade anxiety. And if they talk this way about a man's statue, you can only imagine what they might whisper about a woman's face. In this atmosphere, you stumble upon a strange and telling custom, the concept of the pharmakos. In times of plague, famine, or great crisis, a city would sometimes select a human scapegoat. This person, often someone ugly, deformed, or an outcast, would be ritually paraded through the city, taking all the community's impurities and misfortunes onto themselves, before being ceremonially beaten and cast out, or in some darker, earlier traditions, possibly even killed. It was a ritual of purification, but the strange part is the double meaning of the word pharmakos. It can mean scapegoat, but it's related to pharmakon, which means both remedy and poison. This captures the Greek paradox perfectly. That which can save you can also destroy you. That which is extraordinary, either extraordinarily ugly or, in your case, extraordinarily beautiful, has a dangerous power. You, in your own way, are a potential pharmakos. Your beauty could be seen as a blessing to your family, a source of a good marriage alliance. But if things go wrong, if a harvest fails or a war is lost, that same extraordinary quality makes you an easy target for blame. You upset the natural order. You must have, somehow, angered the gods. The historians are still locked in a deep debate over the pharmakos ritual itself. Did they really execute these scapegoats, as some early sources suggest? Or was it a purely symbolic act of expulsion? The evidence is murky and often filtered through writers with their own agendas. Some scholars argue the tales of human sacrifice were exaggerations, meant to make rival cities look barbaric, while others believe it points to a darker, more primitive layer of Greek religion that the later, more civilized philosophers tried to obscure. Regardless of the grim reality, the idea of the pharmakos is what matters. It proves that the society had a built-in mechanism for identifying and purging anything, or anyone, that was too different. So you learn the art of deflection. When someone compliments your appearance, you learn to look down, to blush, to attribute it to the favor of a goddess, a favor you pray you don't actually have. You learn to praise the beauty of others, to downplay your own. It's a delicate dance of false modesty, but it's a necessary one. You're not just being polite. You're actively trying to manage the envy of both mortals and gods. You are trying to convince the universe, and everyone in it, that you are not a threat. You are not a challenger. You are just a humble mortal who happens to inhabit a face that looks dangerously close to a divine blueprint. You are trying, with every fiber of your being, not to be noticed by the very beings your culture worships. Now that you understand the terrifying cosmic rule, don't be too proud. Don't stand out. Don't anger the gods. Let's get specific. Which god, exactly, should you be most worried about? If your particular brand of hubris is beauty, there is only one name that should make a cold dread crawl up your spine. Aphrodite. She is the goddess of love, beauty, pleasure, and procreation. And you might think, great, the goddess of beauty, we should get along just fine. That would be your first, and possibly last, mistake. Imagine her, not as a delicate, cherubic figure from a Renaissance painting, but as the Greeks saw her. She is terrifyingly powerful. She can inspire love so passionate it builds cities, and a lust so destructive it burns them to the ground. Her gifts are oft on double-edged swords. She can make you the most desirable person in the world, but she offers no protection from the consequences of that desire. She is the embodiment of an elemental, uncontrollable force of nature, as unpredictable as a wildfire and as overwhelming as a tidal wave. She is not your friend. She is your cosmic rival. You hear her origin story whispered, and it's not a gentle one. There are two main versions. In the more stately, Homeric version, she is the daughter of Zeus and the Titanestial, but the other, older, more shocking version is the one that truly defines her. The poet Hesiod tells of the Titan Cronus castrating his father, Uranus, the sky god, and flinging his severed members into the sea. From the churning, bubbling sea foam, 8 pH Ross, that resulted, Aphrodite arose, fully forward, and floated to shore on a scallop shell. Her birth is an act of primordial violence. She is born from castration and the sea, from brutality and chaos. This isn't the goddess of sweet, gentle romance. This is the goddess of overwhelming, world-altering passion, born from an act of cosmic horror. You need to understand her portfolio. She doesn't just govern aesthetics. She governs the irresistible, often irrational, pull of attraction itself. When men go mad with love, that's Aphrodite. When a powerful leader makes a disastrous political decision for the sake of a beautiful lover, that's Aphrodite. She has a magical girdle, that makes its wearer completely irresistible to gods and mortals alike. Even the ever-wise and formidable Hera has to borrow it when she wants to seduce her own husband, Zeus. This tells you everything you need to know. Aphrodite's power is so fundamental that even the queen of the gods needs to ask her for a loan. Now, consider your position. If you are a mortal woman of extraordinary beauty, you are, by definition, treading on her turf. You are infringing on her copyright. You are a cheap, mortal knockoff of her divine perfection, and she does not appreciate the competition. Any praise directed at you is praise that, in her mind, rightfully belongs to her. You are a walking, breathing act of blasphemy. The danger isn't that you might claim to be as beautiful as she is. The danger is that other people might start saying it, and that is a slight she is constitutionally incapable of ignoring. You pass by a small shrine in a residential courtyard. It's not grand, just a little niche in a wall with a few wilting flowers and a small terracotta figurine of a dove, one of her sacred animals. A woman is lighting a stick of incense, her lips moving in a silent prayer. What is she praying for? Perhaps for a husband, or for a healthy child, but she might also be praying for protection from the goddess's less helpful interventions. It's a delicate negotiation, and you discover a quirky, almost comical piece of her mythology, her association with shellfish and fish. As a goddess born from the sea, she was the patron of all its creatures. This led to a strange belief among some ancient communities that eating certain types of fish or shellfish on her festival days was taboo, an act of disrespect to the goddess. It's a small, domestic detail, but it shows how her influence permeated every aspect of life, from the grand passions of war down to what you could or couldn't have for dinner. The academic world still argues about Aphrodite's true origins. Was she a purely Greek invention, or was she, as many clues suggest, an import? Her name doesn't seem to have Greek roots. Her character and portfolio bear a striking resemblance to much older Near Eastern goddesses like the Phoenician Astarte, the Sumerian Inanna, and the Babylonian Ishtar. These were powerful, often fierce goddesses of love, fertility, and also, crucially, war. The debate centers on how much the Greeks borrowed and how much they transformed her. Was she a foreign goddess who was gradually Hellenized, softened and made to fit into the Olympian pantheon? Or does her wild, violent, chaotic nature represent the survival of her or ancient, formidable Near Eastern character? Whatever her origin, the result is the same for you. She is a goddess defined by her absolute monopoly on beauty and desire. She is vain. She is easily offended, and her punishments are notoriously cruel and disproportionate. She won't just strike you with a lightning bolt. That's her father's style. Her revenge is more insidious, more psychological. She will use her own tools against you. She will weaponize love, twist desire into a curse, and ensure that the very thing that makes you beautiful becomes the source of your utter ruin. You cannot win a beauty contest against her, and, as you're about to find out, even being nominated is a death sentence. The whispers start subtly at first. You catch them at the market, by the public fountain where the women gather to fill their hydria with water. It's not about you. Not yet. But it's a story that feels uncomfortably close to home. It's the story of a king and queen in some unnamed city who had 3 daughters. The first were beautiful enough to be praised, to secure good marriages. But the third daughter was different. Her name was Psyche. Her beauty wasn't just commendable. It was otherworldly. It was so perfect, so luminous, that it broke the rules. People who saw her were not just filled with admiration. They were struck with a kind of religious awe. They would stare, speechless, as if they were in the presence of a goddess. And that's when the real trouble began. The whispers grew louder, more dangerous. She is a second Aphrodite, people would say, a new Venus, born on Earth. The comparisons became explicit. Travelers who had once journeyed to the great sanctuaries of Aphrodite on Paphos or Cythera to worship the goddess now diverted their course to gaze upon this mortal girl. Psyche, you can picture it, can't you? The altars of Aphrodite growing cold, the garlands wilting, unoffered, the incense no longer burning, the flow of worshippers, the lifeblood of any deity's power and prestige, dwindling to a trickle, all because of a girl, all because of a face, from her throne on Olympus, or wherever it is that goddesses go to be furious. Aphrodite noticed. Of course, she noticed. This wasn't just an insult. It was a fundamental threat to her very identity. It was cosmic plagiarism of the highest order. The story of Psyche and her divine tormentor is most famously told by a Roman writer named Apuleius in his quirky, rambling novel, The Golden Ass, and because it's from a Roman source, he calls the goddess Venus. But make no mistake, this is the Greek Aphrodite in all her terrifying vanity. The narrative serves as the ultimate cautionary tale, a detailed, step-by-step instruction manual on how a goddess's jealousy can systematically dismantle a mortal's life. The first part of the curse is insidious and brilliant. Aphrodite doesn't strike Psyche down. She doesn't mar her face or turn her into an animal. She does something far more cruel. She isolates her, while Psyche's beauty is worshipped from afar. No one, not a prince, not a king, not even a commoner, comes forward to ask for her hand in marriage. Men admire her as a work of art, but they are too intimidated, too awestruck, to approach her as a woman. They worship her, but they do not love her. Her two less beautiful sisters are married off to wealthy kings. But Psyche, the most beautiful of all, remains at home, a lonely, sterile icon in her father's house. Her beauty has made her untouchable. It has become a cage. Her parents, distraught and confused, consult the oracle of Apollo at Miletus. They want to know why their perfect daughter is doomed to be alone. The oracle's response is chilling. It declares that Psyche is not destined for a mortal husband. Her fated groom is a monstrous, winged serpent, a creature so terrible that even the gods, including Zeus himself, fear him. The oracle commands that Psyche must be dressed in funeral clothes, taken to the highest peak of a mountain, and left there to be claimed by her monstrous husband. This is Aphrodite's revenge. Part 1. It's a masterclass in psychological torture. She has taken Psyche's defining quality, her beauty, and made it the very thing that prevents her from having a normal human life. She has turned admiration into a form of imprisonment, and now she has condemned her to a fate that is, on its face, a lonely, unterrifying death. The entire city mourns. They led Psyche through the streets in a grim parody of a wedding procession, which is also a funeral march. Psyche herself, having lived with this curse of beauty her whole life, is resigned. She doesn't weep. She has long understood that her face was never a gift. As you listen to this story, you realize it's not just a myth. It's a social commentary. It reflects a deep-seated anxiety about a woman whose beauty is too great to be contained within the normal structures of society. What do you do with a woman who can't be married off? A woman who disrupts the normal flow of patriarchal exchange. The myth provides a terrifying answer. You offer her up to a monster. You sacrifice her to restore the natural order. You learn a strange detail about Greek marriage rituals that makes this story even more poignant. A young bride on her wedding day would often dedicate her childhood toys and her girdle, a symbol of her girlhood, to a goddess, usually Artemis, the protector of young girls. It was a formal farewell to her life as a child before she entered the world of a wife. Psyche gets no such gentle transition. Her wedding and her funeral are one and the same. She is being offered not to her husband, but to her void. Her beauty has made her so singular that she no longer fits into the world of mortals. The historical debate around this story is fascinating. Is it an ancient, authentic Greek myth that Apuleius was simply recording, or is it more of a literary invention? a kind of philosophical allegory crafted by Apuleius himself to explore themes of love, soul, and redemption. Using the framework of a folktale, scholars lean towards the latter, seeing it as a sophisticated blend of a common beauty and the beast-type folktale with Platonic philosophy. The name Psyche, after all, is the Greek word for soul, so the story is not just about a pretty girl. It's about the soul's long and arduous journey to be united with divine love. But even if it is a literary creation, it had to be believable to its audience. It had to tap into their existing beliefs about the gods, their vanity, and the very real dangers of mortal beauty. It worked because everyone already knew the fundamental rule: do not, under any circumstances, get into a beauty contest with a goddess. So there she is, Psyche, the soul, abandoned on a windswept mountain peak, dressed for a wedding that is also a funeral. Her family has retreated, their wails fading into the distance. The city below is a smudge of civilization. She is utterly alone, waiting for a monster. This, she must assume, is the end. But the monster doesn't come. Instead, a gentle wind, Zephyrus, the west wind, lifts her from the rock. It's not a violent gust, but a soft, warm current that cradles her and carries her down into a lush, hidden valley. She lands in a meadow of impossible beauty, a little pocket of paradise. Before her stands a palace that seems to be built not by human hands, but by magic itself. It has golden columns, silver walls, and floors inlaid with precious stones that depict scenes from mythology. Hesitantly, she enters. There are no guards, no servants, no people at all, but her voice, disembodied and kind, speaks to her, welcoming her and telling her that everything she sees is hers. A feast appears on a table, music plays from an unseen source, and a bath is drawn for her. This is not the fate she was promised. That night, in the complete darkness of her new bedroom, her promised husband comes to her. She cannot see his face, and he warns her that she must never, ever try to see it. If she does, he will be forced to leave her forever. He is not a monster. He is a gentle, loving, and passionate companion who has been isolated by her beauty her entire life, finally finds love and connection, but only in total darkness, with a nameless, faceless being. For a time, she is content. She lives in this enchanted palace, wanting for nothing, visited each night by a husband she is coming to love deeply. But human nature, and Aphrodite's cruelty, is relentless. Psyche grows lonely during the long days. She misses her sisters, her invisible husband, despite his misgivings, eventually relents and allows Epirus to bring her sisters for a visit. This is the moment the trap springs. The sisters arrive and are consumed with the venomous, all too human jealousy. They see the opulence of Psyche's life and the mysterious bliss she is experiencing, and they cannot bear it. They prey on her one vulnerability, her ignorance. They plant the seeds of doubt. He must be the monster the oracle spoke of. They hiss, he is just fattening you up to devour you. That's why he won't let you see him. They convince her that for her own safety, she must betray her husband's only rule. That night, armed with a sharp dagger and a hidden oil lamp, Psyche waits for her husband to fall asleep. Her hand trembles. She is torn between her love for him and the terrible fear her sisters have instilled. Finally, she lights the lamp and holds it over his sleeping form, and she sees him. He is no monster. He is Eros, the god of love himself, the son of Aphrodite. He is the most beautiful being she could ever imagine, with golden curls and feathered wings. In her shock and awe, she stumbles. A drop of hot oil from her lamp falls onto his shoulder, and he wakes up. He looks at her with an expression of profound sorrow, and without a word, he flies away, out of the window and into the night. The magical palace and all its gardens vanish with him, leaving Psyche alone again, reaping on the cold, bare ground. Now, Aphrodite's true plan is revealed. She didn't just want to punish Psyche. She wanted to torture her own son, Eros, for daring to defy her. The goddess had originally commanded Eros to use his arrows to make Psyche fall in love with the most violent wretched man alive. But when Eros saw Psyche, he was so stunned by her beauty that he accidentally pricked himself with his own arrow. falling hopelessly in love with her. Everything that happened, the secret love, the hidden palace, was his attempt to protect Psyche from his mother's wrath. Now, the secret is out. Eros is heartbroken and injured, and Psyche is completely at Aphrodite's mercy. The goddess, her rage now incandescent, appears before the weeping girl, and this is where she sets her series of impossible trials. These are not heroic labors like those of Heracles, designed to strengthen valor. These are menial, soul-crushing, and seemingly impossible tasks designed to humiliate and destroy a young woman. First, Aphrodite dumps a massive pile of mixed grains, wheat, barley, millet, poppy seeds, onto the floor and commands Psyche to sort them all into separate piles by morning, or face death. It's a task for an army of servants, not one girl. As Psyche sits in despair, a colony of ants, taking pity on her, comes to her aid, and by morning the work is done. This is a recurring theme. For each impossible task, some small, humble part of the natural world, moved by her plight, helps her. When Aphrodite commands her to gather golden wool from a flock of violet, man-eating sheep, a talking reed tells her to wait until the sheep have brushed against thorny bushes, and then collect the wool from the thorns. When she is ordered to fill a crystal flask with water from the river Styx, a river that flows through the underworld and is guarded by dragons, Zeus's own eagle swoops down and collects the water for her. The academic debate here centers on the meaning of these trials. Are they simply fairy tale devices, or do they have a deeper, allegorical meaning? Many scholars see them as a representation of the soul's purification. Psyche must learn to organize the chaos of her passions, the grains, to gather wisdom without being destroyed by aggression, the root, and to face the waters of death, the Styx. She is being tested and refined. The final task is the most dangerous. Aphrodite, claiming to be weary from nursing her illicit son, sends Psyche to the underworld itself. Her mission, to ask Persephone, the queen of the dead, for a small box of her divine beauty ointment. This is a suicide mission, but a talking tower gives her precise, life-saving instructions on how to navigate the land of the dead, how to pay the ferryman Charon, and how to placate the three-headed dog Cerberus. Psyche succeeds. She gets the box. But on her way back to the world of the living, her curiosity, her fatal flaw, gets the better of her once more. Thinking she could use a little divine beauty to win back Eros, she opens the box. But it contains not beauty, but a death-like, infernal sleep. She collapses on the road, lifeless. And that is where Eros, finally healed and unable to bear living without her, finds her. The curse has run its full, brutal course. The story of Psyche is a long, winding tragedy born from the jealousy of a goddess. But sometimes, the danger to a beautiful woman didn't come from a rival on Mount Olympus. Sometimes, it came from the god who was supposed to be her protector. Sometimes, the divine anger wasn't jealousy. It was something darker, more possessive. And sometimes, the woman who was punished wasn't just cast out or given impossible tasks. She was turned into a monster. A creature so feared that her very name would become synonymous with terror for millennia. Her name was Medusa. Before you picture the snake-haired Gorgon, the creature of myth and legend, you have to erase that image from your mind. The story most people know is the end of her tale, not the beginning. The Roman poet Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, gives us her backstory, and it is a profound tragedy. Medusa, he tells us, was once a human priestess, renowned not for being a monster, but for being exquisitely beautiful. She was one of 3 sisters, the Gorgons, but she was the only one who was mortal. And of all her lovely features, her most celebrated was her hair. It was her crowning glory, a magnificent, flowing mane that men traveled to see and poets wrote verses about. She served in the temple of Athena, the virgin goddess of wisdom, warfare, and crafts. As a priestess of Athena, Medusa would have been sworn to a life of celibacy, dedicating her life and her body to the service of her patron goddess. Her beauty, in this context, was supposed to be a reflection of divine grace, something to be admired but not touched. It was a sacred beauty, housed within a sacred space. but that sacredness offered her no protection. In fact, it made her a target. The god Poseidon, the mighty ruler of the seasoned and notorious fool and error, saw Medusa and was consumed by lust. He didn't court her. He didn't try to win her affection. He saw what he wanted, and he took it. He pursued her, and she fled, seeking sanctuary in the one place she thought she would be safe, her own temple, the temple of Athena. But the sanctity of the space meant nothing to Poseidon. He cornered her there, inside the holy building, and assaulted her. Now, pause here. A mortal woman, a priestess, has just been brutalized within the sacred walls of a temple by one of the most powerful gods in the pantheon. Who is to blame here? Who should be punished? In a just world, the perpetrator, Poseidon, would face the wrath of his niece, Athena, for desecrating her temple and violating her priestess. But this is not a just world. This is the world of the Greek gods. Athena's fury turns not upon the powerful male god who committed the crime, but upon the female victim. Athena's logic, as Ovid presents it, is twisted and cruel. She cannot punish her uncle, Poseidon. He is far too powerful. So, she punishes Medusa. The reason? By being so beautiful. Medusa had lured Poseidon into the temple. Her beauty was the bait. Her hair, her most glorious feature, was the weapon of seduction. Therefore, it is the hair that must be punished. Athena, in an act of horrific victim blaming, transforms Medusa's beautiful locks into a writhing nest of venomous snakes, and as an extra measure of cruelty, she curses Medusa so that any living thing that looks directly upon her face will be instantly turned to stone. Medusa, the beautiful, innocent priestess, becomes Medusa the monster. She is driven from her home, from society, and forced to live in a remote, desolate place, feared and hated by all. Her beauty, the initial source of her trouble, has been twisted into the very instrument of her monstrosity. She is now defined by her ability to destroy, a power she never asked for and cannot control. Her body, once an object of admiration, is now a weapon. You might stumble upon a fascinating, though perhaps unsettling, bit of archaeology that connects to this. In many ancient Greek sites, especially on temples and shields, you'll find a particular symbol, the Gorgon ion. It's the face of a gorgon, usually with a wide, grimacing mouth, a protruding tongue, and snakes for hair. This image was an apiotrope IC symbol, meaning it was believed to ward off evil. By displaying this terrifying face, you could frighten away malevolent spirits or enemies. It's a strange paradox. Medusa's face, the very thing that made her a monster, was adopted by the culture that condemned her as a form of protection. The symbol of her curse became a shield for everyone else. The scholarly debate surrounding Medusa is rich and ongoing. Early Greek art, from before Ovid's time, often depicts the Gorgons as being monstrous from birth, without the tragic backstory. So, a key question for historians and classicists is this: was the story of the beautiful priestess a later invention, created by Ovid and other Roman-era writers to make the myth more sympathetic and tragic? Or does it represent an older, alternative tradition that was less popular but still existed? Feminist scholars, in particular, have analyzed the Medusa myth as a prime example of patriarchal anxiety about female power. They argue that Medusa represents the demonization of female rage. She is the woman who was wronged and, in her monstrous form, poses a threat to the male-dominated heroic order. Her subsequent slaying by the hero Perseus is, in this reading, the symbolic restoration of that order, the male hero conquering the monstrous feminine. So the story of Medusa adds another terrifying layer to your understanding. It's not just about divine jealousy, it's about divine impunity. It teaches you that a god's desire is a law unto itself. It teaches you that in a conflict between a powerful male god and a mortal woman, the woman will always be blamed, and it teaches you that the very same beauty that makes you a target for unwanted attention can be reframed as the cause of the violence committed against you. Your beauty can be used as evidence against you in a cosmic court where you are never, ever allowed to testify. The stories of Psyche and Medusa are chilling, epic tales of divine wrath. but you're not a mythological figure. You're just trying to get through the week. The constant, low-grade fear of accidentally offending a deity is exhausting. So, what do you do? How do you navigate a world where your face could be seen as a provocation? You learn the practical, everyday art of becoming invisible, or, if not invisible, then at least unremarkable. You learn to strategically downplay the very thing that sets you apart. Your first lesson is in dress. You walk through the city and observe what the respectable women, the wives and daughters of Athenian citizens, are wearing. You see them draped in simple, functional garments. The two most common are the peplos and the chiton. The peplos is an earlier style, essentially a large rectangle of heavy wool, folded and pinned at the shoulders. The chiton is made of lighter linen, also a rectangle, but sewn or buttoned along the shoulders and arms, creating something more like a sleeve tunic. They are belted at the waist, and the fabric is often bloused out, obscuring the lines of the body. The colors are not the gaudy rainbow you might imagine from the painted statues. For daily wear, they are often muted, earthy tones made from local dyes, ochres, browns, and soft yellows. Bright, expensive colors like Tyrian purple or saffron yellow were reserved for the very wealthy or for special occasions. The goal of everyday clothing was not to accentuate the female form, but to modestly conceal it. Then there is the matter of your hair. You remember Medusa. Your hair, if it is particularly beautiful, is a potential liability. You learn to bind it up. Respectable women did not typically wear their hair long and flowing in public. That was a style associated with mourning, with certain religious rites, or with unmarried girls. A married woman would wear her hair intricately braided and pinned up into a complex bun or knot at the back of her head, often held in place with simple hairpins of bone or bronze. Sometimes it would be covered entirely by a sackcloth, a soft cap was nude, or by a fold of her himadion, an outer cloak she would wear over her chiton. To have your hair properly contained was a sign of modesty and respectability, of being a civilized, controlled woman. And when you leave the house, you learn to veil yourself, not in the sense of a full, heavy face covering, but by using that same himadion. A woman could, and was often expected to, pull the edge of her cloak up over the lower part of her face, leaving only her eyes visible. This wasn't necessarily a permanent state, but a gesture. You might do it when passing a group of unknown men in the agora, or when speaking to a man who was not your husband or a close male relative. It was a sign of ADOS, a difficult-to-translate concept that means a combination of shame, modesty, reverence, and respect. It was a visible, physical way of saying, I am not here for public consumption. I am not a spectacle. It was a way to control who got to see you, a small act of reclaiming your own face from the public gaze. You noticed something quirky about their cosmetics. While married women were expected to be modest, there was still a place for makeup, or camo issues, but it was a delicate balance. The goal was not to look made up, but to achieve a look of natural, healthy perfection. This meant using cymethion, a lead-based powder, to whiten the skin. A pale complexion was highly prized, as it was a sign you were a wealthy woman who did not have to work outdoors in the sun. They would use a root, possibly from the oakane tea plant, to add a touch of red to their cheeks and lips. They might use soot or charcoal to darken their eyebrows and line their eyes. The weirdest part, the application of this lead-based makeup was not only toxic, slowly poisoning the user over time, but excessive use was associated with courtesans and prostitutes. So a respectable woman had to apply just enough poison to look fashionably pale, but not so much that she looked immoral. It was a literal toxic titropua. The physical boundaries are even stricter than the sartorial ones. The Greek house, the oikos, was fundamentally divided into two spaces. There was the undron, the men's quarters, usually located at the front of the house near the door. This was where the man of the house would entertain his male friends for a symposium. It was a public-facing space. And then there was the gyneceo, the women's quarters, typically located at the back of the house, sometimes on an upper floor. This was your world. It was where you and the other female members of the household and the slaves would spend the vast majority of your time engaged in weaving, childcare, and managing the household stores. For many Athenian women, leading the house was a rare event, reserved for religious festivals, funerals, or visiting close female relatives. Historians have long debated just how strict this gender-based segregation of space really was. Some textual sources paint a picture of near total seclusion, with women living almost like prisoners in their own homes. However, archaeological evidence often complicates this. Many excavated houses don't show a clear, architecturally enforced division between the Andron and Gynoecium. This leads to the soft segregation theory. The division was more about social protocol than solid walls. A woman knew she was not to enter the Andron when her husband was entertaining, and men knew not to intrude upon the women's working space. It was a flexible, socially enforced boundary, not necessarily an architectural one. This debate is ongoing, but the fundamental principle remains. A respectable woman's place was, for the most part, out of the public eye. So you learn the routine. You dress in muted colors that hide your shape. You bind up your glorious hair. You use your cloak to shield your face from strangers. You confine yourself to the back rooms of the house. You are engaged in a constant, daily performance of self-effacement. Every choice, from your hairstyle to the path you take through your own home, is designed to make you smaller, quieter, less visible. It is the opposite of Psyche's curse. She was destroyed because she was too visible. Your survival depends on mastering the art of being unseen. After weeks of learning to blend in, of practicing the art of invisibility, you decide to attend a public festival. It's one of the few occasions where everyone, male and female, citizen and foreigner, gathers together. The city is alive with a chaotic, joyous energy. There are sacrifices, processions, and theatrical performances. It's in this crowd, a sea of faces and voices, that you first see her. Or rather, you feel her presence before you see her. The crowd seems to part, to create a small, revered space around one woman, and then you see her. Helen. She is not just beautiful in the way a statue is beautiful, a cold, geometric perfection. Her beauty is alive. It breathes. It's in the way she moves, the way the light catches in her hair, the way she inclines her head to listen to the person beside her. She possesses a quality the Greeks called charis, a divine grace, an effortless charm that radiates from her. It's not just about her features aligning with the mathematical ideal. It's that she seems to be the living embodiment of that ideal, infused with warmth and life. And as you watch the way people look at her, with a mixture of awe, desire, and a strange, almost fearful reverence, you realize you are looking at the most dangerous woman in the world. This is Helen of Troy, or, right now, she is Helen of Sparta, wife of King Menelaus. The Trojan War has not yet happened. She is not yet the face that launched 1,000 ships, but the potential is already there, shimmering around her like a heat haze. The story of her life, even up to this point, is already a catalogue of the perils of beauty. You've heard the stories. She was born in an even more scandalous way than Aphrodite. Her mother was Leda, the queen of Sparta. Her father was Zeus, who visited Leda in the form of a swan. Leda then laid 2 eggs. From one egg hatched the mortal children, Castor and Kilt and Demas. From the other, the divine egg, hatched the immortal twins, Helen and Polydorsus, also known as Pollux. So, from birth, Helen is semi-divine, the daughter of the king of the gods. Her beauty is literally a gift from on high, setting her apart from all other mortals. Her beauty caused her first major crisis when she was just a girl, perhaps 12 years old. The great hero Theseus, the king of Athens, heard tales of her astonishing looks, traveled to Sparta, and simply abducted her. He kidnapped a child because he wanted to possess her beauty for himself, intending to keep her until she was old enough to marry. She was eventually rescued by her powerful brothers, the Dioscuri, but the precedent was set. Her beauty made her a prize to be stolen, a political object before she was even a woman. When she finally did come of age to marry, it caused a crisis that nearly plunged all of Greece into war. Every unmarried king and prince in the Hellenic world descended upon Sparta to vie for her hand. Her stepfather, King Andorese, was terrified. He knew that if he chose one suitor, all the others, powerful and proud men, would turn on him and on the victor. The competition for Helen was so fierce it threatened to tear the fragile alliance of Greek city-states apart. It was the wily Odysseus who came up with the solution. Before the decision was made, he made every single one of her suitors swear a solemn oath. They had to swear that they would all accept Indorese's choice of husband, and more importantly, that if anyone ever tried to steal Helen away from her chosen husband in the future, they would all band together in a military alliance to bring her back. This is the Oath of Tyndareus. It was a clever piece of political maneuvering designed to prevent a war, but in a supreme act of irony, it became the very mechanism that would later guarantee the Trojan War. By trying to solve the problem of Helen's beauty, they created the legal and military framework for the largest conflict their world had ever known. Menelaus was chosen. The other suitors went home, and a fragile peace settled over the land. As you look at her now, standing in the festival crowd, you see the weight of this history. She is a political symbol, a divine prize, a walking, breathing diplomatic incident waiting to happen. And now, you hear the whispers about a new visitor to Sparta, a handsome, charming prince from the wealthy eastern city of Troy, named Paris. He is here on a diplomatic mission, but people notice the way he looks at Helen, and they notice the way Aphrodite's favor seems to cling to him. You learn about a strange and rather petty divine event that preceded Paris's arrival, the judgment of Paris. At the wedding of the hero Peleus and the scene Thetis, all the gods were invited except for Eris, the goddess of discord. Annoyed, she tossed a golden apple into the middle of the feast, inscribed with the words for the fairest. Immediately, 3 goddesses claimed it: Hera, the queen of the gods; Athena, the goddess of wisdom; and Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Zeus, wisely wanting no part in this dispute, appointed the mortal Paris to be the judge. Each goddess offered him a bride. Hera offered him power over all of Asia. Athena offered him wisdom and victory in battle. And Aphrodite offered him the most beautiful woman in the world for his wife. Paris, a man ruled by passion, chose Aphrodite. He gave her the golden apple, and in doing so, he earned the eternal enmity of Hera and Athena, and a promise from Aphrodite that he would have Helen of Sparta. Historians and classicists still debate the origins of this particular story. Is the judgment of Paris an ancient part of the Trojan War cycle, or a later, more romantic addition designed to give the whole conflict a more personal, fateful beginning? Some evidence suggests it might have been a later invention, a way to weave the goddesses' rivalries more directly into the fabric of the war. But like the story of Psyche, it doesn't matter if it was real. It was true in a cultural sense. It articulated a core belief: a woman's beauty is a prize, an object to be awarded by one man, a god, to another, a prince, with absolutely no regard for the woman's own life, marriage, or desires. Helen, in this narrative, is not a person. She is a trophy, a beautiful, breathing, catastrophic trophy, and she has just been promised to someone else. The party is over. The charming Trojan prince, Paris, has sailed for home, and Helen is gone. Whether she was abducted against her will or went willingly is the question that will echo through the ages, the central, unanswerable mystery at the heart of the epic. But back in Sparta, the immediate result is outrage. Menelaus, her husband, returns home to find his wife and a significant portion of his treasure missing. His honor has been violated. His hospitality has been betrayed, and the most beautiful woman in the world has been stolen from him. This is the moment the gears of that terrible machine, the Oath of Tyndareus, begin to grind. Messengers are sent to every king and prince who once vied for Helen's hand. The old suitors, now powerful rulers in their own right, are called upon to honor their vow. Agamemnon, Menelaus's brother and the powerful king of Mycenae, takes charge. 8,000 ships are gathered. An army, the likes of which Greece has never seen, is mustered, all to sail across the Aegean to the mighty city of Troy to get her back. And this is where the narrative gets cemented, where the official story is written. It is written not in court records or historical treatises, But in the epic poetry of Homer and the tragedies of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, and the story they tell, the one that will be repeated for 3,000 years, is elegantly simple. This is all Helen's fault. You're sitting in a vast, open-air amphitheater, carved into the side of a hill. The sun is hot. You are watching a play, perhaps one of Euripides' great tragedies. The actors wear large, expressive masks and elaborate costumes. A chorus of men, moving and chanting in unison, provides commentary on the action. And when they speak of the war, they speak of Helen. They call her the dog-eyed one, a term of ultimate contempt. They call her a curse, a plague. The old men of Troy, in Homer's Iliad, see her walking on the city walls and mutter, "No wonder the Trojans and the Chians have suffered so long for such a woman." Even in their of her beauty, they frame it as the cause of their suffering. This is the birth of a powerful and enduring cultural trope, the beautiful woman as the scapegoat for male violence. The decision to go to war was made by men. The oath was sworn by men. The armies are led by men. The fighting is done by men. The political ambitions, the desire for glory, Kalios, the greed for Trojan gold. These are all male motivations. And yet, the poets and playwrights found it incredibly convenient to place the entire moral and ethical weight of a decade-long, brutal war squarely on the shoulders of one woman. Why? Because it's easy. It absolves everyone else of responsibility. Agamemnon doesn't have to be a power-hungry warlord using his brother's marital problems as a pretext for a war of conquest. The Greek heroes don't have to be raiders and pirates seeking plunder. The Trojans don't have to be stubborn defenders of a prince who broke the sacred laws of hospitality. No, it's much simpler. A beautiful woman made a bad choice, and all this horror is the result. She becomes a neat, tidy explanation for a messy, complex geopolitical conflict. You see this reflected in their language. The word for cause or reason is aidia, but it also carries a sense of blame or guilt. When they ask for the aidia of the war, they are also asking for who is to blame, and the poets provide a ready-made answer. Helen, you might come across a strange and obscure fragment of a poem by a writer named Stesichorus. The legend goes that he wrote a poem that was highly critical of Helen, blaming her in the traditional way. And as a punishment for slandering the semi-divine daughter of Zeus, he was struck blind. Terrified, he wrote a second poem, a retraction, called a Palinode. In this new version, he puts forth a truly bizarre theory. The Helen who went to Troy was not the real Helen. She was a phantom, an eidolon, a perfect replica crafted from clouds by the gods. The real Helen, he claimed, was magically whisked away to Egypt, where she remained, faithful and blameless, for the entire duration of the war. The Greeks and Trojans fought and died for 10 years over a ghost. After writing this poem, Stesichorus supposedly had his sight restored. This story, whether true or not, is incredibly revealing. It shows that there was at least some cultural anxiety about placing so much blame on Helen. The eidolon theory is a wild, almost desperate attempt to exonerate her, to find a version of the story where the beautiful woman is not the cause of all this death. It's a minority report, a footnote in the grand narrative, but it proves that the question of her guilt was not entirely settled. The mainstream academic view, of course, is that the Trojan War, if it happened at all, was likely a conflict over trade routes, resources, or territory. The abduction of Helen was probably a poetic justification, a casus belli that was more romantic and honorable than a squabble over bronze and tin. The debate over the historicity of the Trojan War is one of the oldest and most contentious in all of classical studies. Did a coalition of Mycenaean Greeks really sack a city in Anatolia around 1200 BC? The archaeological evidence at the site of Hyzerelike, believed to be Troy, shows a city that was destroyed and rebuilt many times. And one layer, Troy v. Aia, shows signs of a violent end consistent with the time period. But there's no inscription. No, we were here from Agamemnon. The link between the archaeology and the epic is still a matter of intense scholarly argument. But for the average Athenian watching a play, the historical reality didn't matter. The story was the reality. and the story was clear. The war was a woman's fault. This narrative is a powerful tool. It allows an entire society to engage in brutal warfare while maintaining a sense of moral high ground. They aren't invaders. They are dispensers of justice. They are righteous husbands and brothers. It's a perfect piece of propaganda, and Helen is its unwilling, beautiful poster child. The war is over. Troy has fallen. The Greek heroes are sailing home, their ships laden with gold, bronze, and enslaved Trojan women. And Menelaus has his wife back. He found her. The story goes, in the sacked city, and he raised his sword to kill her for her betrayal. But at the last moment, he looked at her face, and his will to punish her dissolved in the face of her overwhelming beauty. He couldn't do it. He takes her home to Sparta, where they supposedly live out the rest of their days. A happy ending. Not exactly. The story of Helen has now been unleashed upon the world, and it has consequences for everyone. For the average Greek man, the story of Helen plants a seed of deepened, abiding anxiety. It fundamentally changes the perception of what a beautiful wife represents. She is no longer just a desirable partner, a sign of good fortune, or the future mother of his children. She is now, thanks to Helen, a potential liability. A beautiful wife is a source of constant, low-grade fear. She is a risk. She is a beautiful evil. A challenge. An idea will come back too. You are sitting in a tavern, or perhaps just listening to men talk in the agora. The conversation turns to a neighbor who has just married a particularly stunning young woman. The comments are not what you might expect. Instead of simple congratulations, there's a nervous, jesting quality to their words. Better keep a close eye on her. One man says with a laugh that's a little too sharp, "Don't let any Trojan princes visit," says another. The jokes all circle around the same central fear, that her beauty will attract trouble to his doorstep, that she will, through no fault of his own, bring ruin upon him. This anxiety is rooted in the competitive, honor-based nature of Greek society. A man's honor, his time, was one of his most valuable possessions. It was based on his reputation, his wealth, his military prowess, and, crucially, his ability to control his household, his oikos. His wife was the centerpiece of that household. Her fidelity and modesty were a direct reflection of his own authority and status. An unfaithful wife was not just a personal heartbreak. It was a public humiliation. It meant he was not man enough to control his own home, and therefore, how could he be trusted to play a role in the life of the city? Helen's story takes this fear and amplifies it to an epic scale. Her alleged affair didn't just humiliate Menelaus in Sparta. It humiliated him in front of the entire Greek world. It required a decade of war, the death of thousands, and the combined might of all the Achaean kings to restore his honor. This is the ultimate cautionary tale. The message is clear. The more beautiful the wife, the greater the risk of a catastrophic loss of honor. Her beauty increases the number of potential challengers, the priestess who might try to steal her away. Her face becomes a measure of his vulnerability. You see this anxiety reflected in their laws. In Athens, if a man caught another man in the act of adultery with his wife, the law gave him the right to kill the adulterer on the spot with impunity. This wasn't considered murder. It was considered a justifiable act to restore the honor of his household. The law was far less concerned with the wife's feelings or agency than with the property rights and honor of the husband. The adulterer was seen as a thief who had trespassed and stolen from the man of the house. You come across a rather bizarre and revealing little tidbit from Spartan society. While most of Greece was deeply anxious about adultery, the Spartans had a much more, let's say, pragmatic approach, particularly when it came to procreation. If a man was old and his wife was still young and vital, it was apparently not unheard of for him to choose a handsome, strong young man to father a child with his wife. The goal was to produce the best possible offspring for the state. The child would be considered the legal heir of the husband. This practice, known as wife sharing, was shocking to other Greeks, like the Athenians, who saw it as a complete breakdown of marital order. For the Spartans, the needs of the collective, of the state, trumped the individual honor of the husband. It's a fascinating counterpoint to the Helen-inspired anxiety that gripped the rest of the Greek world. The debate among historians on this topic is subtle but important. Did the story of Helen create this anxiety, or did it simply give a powerful, mythological voice to an anxiety that already existed? Most scholars would argue for the latter. The patriarchal structure, the emphasis on honor, the view of women as a form of property to be managed. These things were already deeply embedded in the culture. The Helen story didn't invent the fear of the beautiful wife. It just gave it a name and a face. It turned a general social anxiety into a specific, terrifying narrative. So, for the average man, a beautiful wife becomes a kind of high-stakes gamble. She might bring him status and beautiful children, but she also brings the constant threat of public shame and the potential for violence. This has a profound effect on women. It means that your beauty, in the eyes of your own husband, is not an unalloyed good. It is something that needs to be managed, controlled, and, most importantly, hidden. Your public invisibility, which you once practiced to avoid the wrath of the gods, now serves a second purpose: to soothe the anxieties of your own husband. You must be beautiful enough to secure a good marriage, but modest and invisible enough afterward to ensure that you don't endanger your husband's honor and, by extension, your own safety and stability. It is an impossible tightrope to walk. Your beauty has become your husband's burden, and therefore, it is your burden as well. The more you hear the story of Helen, the more it seems to crumble under its own weight. It's too meek, too poetic, too full of divine meddling and grand passions. It feels less like a historical accountant, more like a libretto for an opera. You start to ask a question that feels both obvious and heretical. Was she even real? Did Helen of Sparta, the daughter of Zeus and Leda, the most beautiful woman in the world, ever actually exist as a living, breathing person? This question throws you right into the middle of one of the longest-running and most passionate debates in classical scholarship. It's a battle that has been waged for centuries, pitting romantic, literary interpretation against hard-nosed, skeptical, historical analysis. On one side, you have the believers, who argue that the core of the Homeric epics must be based on some kind of historical truth. On the other, the skeptics, who see the entire Trojan War saga, Helen included, as a foundational myth, a piece of cultural fiction with no more basis in reality than the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. Let's start with the case for her being a myth. From this perspective, Helen is not a person. She is a symbol. She is a narrative device, a personification of a casus belli. Ancient societies often explained complex geopolitical events through simple, personal stories. We went to war, get our queen back sounds much nobler and is much easier to rally people around than we went to war to secure access to the obsidian raid in the Dardanelles. Helen, in this view, is the beautiful, human face put on a conflict that was actually about power, trade routes, and resources. Her very origins scream mythology. Born from an egg laid by a mother who was seduced by a god in the form of a swan. That's not a biography. That's a divine folktale. Her name, Helene, is also suspicious. Some scholars have linked it to ancient, pre-Greek words for the sun or for light, suggesting she might have originally been a much older, pre-Hell solar goddess. The theory goes that, over time, as the Olympian pantheon became standardized, this ancient goddess was demoted from a deity to a mortal heroine, and her story was woven into the new heroic mythology of the Trojan War. Her cult in Sparta, where she was worshipped alongside her husband Menelaus as a goddess of marriage and fertility, seems to support this idea. People don't typically worship their historical queens as goddesses hundreds of years after their death. They worship figures who have a much deeper, more ancient religious significance. Now, let's look at the other side, the case for a real Helen. Proponents of this view don't necessarily believe in the swan and the egg, but they argue that a legendary figure can be built around a real historical core. Perhaps there was a particularly beautiful queen in Sparta or one of the other Mycenaean palaces. Perhaps she was involved in a diplomatic incident, an abduction, or an elopement that triggered a conflict. The story would then have been embellished over centuries of oral tradition, with the poets adding the divine parentage. the contest of the goddesses, and the epic scale of the war to make a better story. The real Helen argument leans heavily on the work of archaeologists, since Heinrich Schliemann's dramatic, and often reckless, excavations in the 19th century. We know that the cities described by Homer, Mycenae rich in gold, the mighty walls of Troy, were real places. We have the linear B tablets, the administrative records of the Mycenaean palaces, which show a highly organized, bureaucratic, and warlike society, consistent in many ways with the world Homer describes. If the setting is real, the argument goes, isn't it plausible that some of the characters are based on real people? The problem, of course, is that while we have records of flax shipments and chariot wheel inventories, the linear B tablets contain no names that can be definitively linked to the heroes of the Trojan War. There is no mention of Agamemnon, Achilles, or Helen. You come across a fascinating and bizarre little corner of this debate, the theory of euhemerism, named after a Greek mythographer named Euhemerus from the 4th century BCE. This is the idea that all gods and myths are simply exaggerated versions of real historical events and people. In this view, Zeus wasn't a god who threw lightning bolts. He was a powerful ancient king whose deeds were so great that later generations started worshipping him as a deity. Applied to Helen, Euhemerism would suggest that she was absolutely a real queen, and the story of her divine birth was a later addition to flatter her descendants and prestige to her memory. It's an attempt to have it both ways, to accept the story while stripping it of its supernatural elements. So, where does the consensus lie today? Most mainstream historians and archaeologists would land somewhere in a cautious middle ground. They would agree that the Trojan War epics are not historical documents. They are poetry, foundational myths created and shaped over hundreds of years. However, they would also concede that these myths are likely inspired by a collective memory of a real historical period, the turbulent Late Bronze Age, a time of great palace states, long-distance trade, and violent conflict. Helen, therefore, is best understood as a legendary character, not a historical one. Whether there was one specific real woman at the heart of the legend is probably unanswerable and, to some extent, irrelevant. What's more important is what she became, real or not. Her story was adopted as truth by the classical Greeks. Her narrative was used to explain their world, to justify their social structures, and to articulate their deepest anxieties about women, beauty, and power. She is a ghost who haunts the Greek imagination. She is the ultimate proof that a story doesn't have to be factually true to be powerful. In this world, the myth of Helen and the blame she carries is more real and has more impact on your life as a woman than any historical fact ever could. The question of her reality becomes a philosophical knot. If a fictional character's story dictates the rules of your reality, what is the meaningful difference between real and myth? The stories of gods and epic heroes feel distant, larger than life. They are the grand, terrifying weather systems that shape the landscape of your world. But now, we need to talk about the ground beneath your feet. We need to talk about the law, because in ancient Greece, and specifically in democratic Athens, the dangers you face as a beautiful woman aren't just mythological. They are codified, legal, and inescapable. The most important thing you need to understand is this: you do not belong to yourself. From the moment you are born to the moment you die, you are under the legal authority of a man. This man is your Kyrios. The word translates as Lord, Master, or Guardian, and he has almost total control over your life. When you are a child, your Kyrios is your father. He decides if you will be raised or, if you are an unwanted baby, exposed on a hillside to die. A brutal but not uncommon practice, especially for girls. He decides who you will marry, when you will marry, and what dowry you will bring to the marriage. When you get married, the authority of the Kyrios doesn't disappear. It is simply transferred. Your husband now becomes your Kyrios. You go from being the property of your father to being the property of your husband. The marriage ceremony itself, the engythos, was fundamentally a contract between two men. The bride's old Kyrios, her father, and her, new Kyrios, her husband. The father would say a phrase something like, I give you this woman for the plowing of legitimate children. It's a stark agricultural metaphor. You are the field, and your husband is the plowman. Your primary legal and social function is to be the vessel through which he can produce legitimate heirs to inherit his property and continue his family line. What does this mean in practice? It means you cannot own property of any significant value, while your dowry is technically yours and is meant to support you. It is administered entirely by your husband. You cannot enter into a contract for anything worth more than a medimons of barley, a small, almost trivial amount of grain. You cannot represent yourself in court. If you need to sue someone, or if someone sues you, your Kyrios must speak for you. You are, in legal terms, in the same category as a minor or a slave. You are a legal nonentity. Your citizenship status is also ambiguous. You are the daughter of an Athenian citizen, and you are the wife of an Athenian citizen, but you are not, yourself, a citizen in the functional sense of the word. You cannot vote. You cannot hold office. You cannot participate in the assembly or the law courts. The very institutions that defined Athenian democracy, the democracy that Athens is so famous for, was a club for adult citizen males only. You are essential to its continuation. Only a child of two Athenian parents could be a full citizen, but you are excluded from its practice. Now, imagine you are a woman of remarkable beauty in this system. Your beauty, like your dowry, is not your own asset. It is an asset belonging to your Kyrios. It is something he can leverage to arrange a more advantageous marriage for you, securing a powerful alliance for himself and his family. Your face is a piece of his political and social capital. This makes you incredibly vulnerable. If a powerful man desires you, he doesn't negotiate with you. He negotiates with your Kyrios, and your Kyrios might be tempted or intimidated into making a deal that benefits him. Regardless of your own feelings or safety, you learn about a strange, almost comical legal procedure that highlights this lack of autonomy. It's called epidikosia. If a woman's father died without any male heirs, she became an eros, a kind of heiress, but she didn't inherit the property. Instead, she became attached to the property. She was the inheritance. The law then required her to marry her closest male relative, usually her father's brother or cousin, in order to keep the family property within the family line. It didn't matter if he was old, if he was already married, or if she despised him. The law mandated, if multiple relatives had an equal claim, they would go to court to argue over who had the right to marry her and, by extension, get the property. The woman herself had absolutely no say in the matter. She was a human prize passed along with the house and the olive groves. The academic debate here is intense. Some historians, relying on the stark letter of the law and the writings of philosophers like Aristotle, who famously declared that the male is by nature superior and the female inferior, paint a picture of Athenian women living in a state of near total oppression, their lives completely circumscribed by their male guardians. Other scholars, however, argue that this purely legalistic view misses the nuances of real life. They point to evidence from plays, from funerary inscriptions, and from household archaeology that suggests women exercised a significant degree of informal power within the home. They managed the household budget, controlled the slaves, raised the children, and held considerable influence over their husbands through personal relationships. This more revisionist view argues that while the law was absolute, the daily reality was a constant negotiation. The relationship between a woman and her Kyrios wasn't always one of a master and a slave. It could also be one of partnership and mutual affection. The truth, as is often the case, is probably a messy combination of both. The legal framework was undeniably oppressive, but within that framework, individual women found ways to navigate their world and exert their agency. But even with that more nuanced view, the fundamental vulnerability remains. Whatever power you have is informal, personal, and contingent on the goodwill of your Kyrios. The law is not on your side, it is on his. So when you walk through the streets of Athens, your beauty isn't just a magnet for the unwanted attention of gods or the envy of mortals. It is a beacon that highlights your unique legal status as a valuable, transferable, and ultimately controllable piece of property. You are a living, breathing testament to the fact that in this shining democracy, some people are fundamentally more free than others. The law makes you vulnerable, a piece of property to be managed by your curios. But what happens when the one who desires you isn't just a powerful citizen, but a god? The story of Helen and Theseus already gave you a hint. When a powerful being wants you, they often don't ask. They take this idea of abduction as a form of courtship, or at least as an acceptable way to acquire a wife, is deeply embedded in the mythological subconscious of the Greek world. And there is no story more central to this theme than the abduction of Persephone. You hear this story told not as a romance, but as a foundational myth, an ideological tale designed to explain the changing of the seasons. Persephone was the daughter of Demeter, the powerful goddess of the harvest, grain, and agriculture. Like Medusa in her early days, Persephone was a beautiful, innocent maiden. At Kure, she spent her days in idyllic meadows, gathering flowers with her nymph companions. She was a picture of youthful springtime vitality. Hades, the grim and wealthy ruler of the underworld, saw her, and, like his brother Poseidon, he was consumed by desire. But Hades, being the lord of the dead, was not exactly a welcome suitor. He knew Demeter would never agree to let her vibrant, life-giving daughter marry the king of darkness and decay. So he went to the king of all the gods, his brother Zeus, who was also Persephone's father, and asked for her hand. Zeus, in a classic act of moral cowardice and political maneuvering, neither approved nor disapproved. He simply gave a nod, a silent, non-committal gesture that Hades chose to interpret as permission. So Hades did not send emissaries or wedding gifts. He acted. One day, as Persephone was picking flowers, she was drawn to a particularly stunning narcissus, a flower said to have been placed there by Gaia, the earth goddess, as a favor to Hades. As she reached down to pick it, the ground split open, a great chasm appeared, and from it, Hades emerged in his golden chariot drawn by black, immortal horses. He snatched the screaming girl, pulled her into the chariot, and descended back into the earth, the chasm closing over them as if nothing had happened. This is the divine template for abduction. It is sudden, violent, and sanctioned, or at least passively allowed, by the highest patriarchal authority, Zeus. Persephone's own will is completely irrelevant. Her mother's will is bypassed. The desire of the powerful male god is the only thing that matters. He takes what he wants, and the earth itself conspires to help him. The rest of the myth details the devastating grief of her mother, Demeter. Realizing her daughter is missing, she wanders the earth for 9 days, foregoing food, drink, and her divine duties. The world begins to wither. Crops fail, seeds won't sprout, and humanity faces starvation. It's a powerful statement. The violation of this one girl and the grief of her mother have the power to halt all life on earth. Finally, Demeter learns the truth about Hades' abduction and Zeus's complicity. In her rage, she withdraws completely, threatening to make the earth permanently barren unless her daughter is returned. Faced with the extinction of humanity, and therefore the end of all worship and sacrifice to the gods, Zeus is finally forced to act. He sends Hermes, the messenger god, down to the underworld to command Hades to release Persephone. Hades, unable to defy a direct order from Zeus, agrees, but before he lets her go, he employs one last trick. He offers her a pomegranate seed to eat. Persephone, having eaten nothing in her grief, accepts and eats a few seeds. It seems like a small, insignificant act, but it is a binding one. Anyone who eats the food of the underworld is forever tied to it, so a compromise is reached. Because she ate the pomegranate seeds, Persephone cannot be completely freed. She must spend part of the year in the underworld as Hades' queen, but for the rest of the year, she can return to the world above to be with her mother. And so, the seasons are born. When Persephone is with Hades, Demeter grieves, and the world experiences autumn and winter. When Persephone returns, Demeter rejoices, and the world blossoms into spring and summer. You might notice a strange detail in some local marriage customs that seems to echo this story. In some parts of Greece, a symbolic abduction of the bride was part of the wedding ritual. The groom would arrive with his friends and theatrically seize the bride from her family's home, while her family offered mock resistance. This wasn't a real abduction, of course. It was a ritual performance, a piece of theater, but it's a chilling piece of theater. It normalizes the idea that marriage begins with an act of male seizure, turning the brutal myth of Persephone into a domestic, celebratory tradition. The academic debate around this myth is vast. What is its true origin? Is it purely an agricultural allegory, or is it a political one, representing the conquest of an earlier, matriarchal earth goddess cult, Demeter and Persephone, by the newer, patriarchal sky god cult, Zeus and the Olympians? Feminist interpretations see it as a stark allegory for the trauma of arranged marriage in a patriarchal society. The young girl, Kur, is violently torn from her mother's world, Deniseum, and forced into the dark, unknown world of her husband, a symbolic death of her girlhood. Her annual return to her mother is a temporary reprieve, a nod to the powerful, enduring bond between mother and daughter that even the patriarchal structure cannot entirely break. For you, a beautiful woman in ancient Greece, the story of Persephone is a constant, terrifying background home. It naturalizes the idea of abduction. It teaches that even a goddess can be stolen if a more powerful god desires her. It establishes a precedent where the consent of the woman and her mother can be overridden by a deal struck between powerful men. And it shows that even when justice is sought, the resolution is often a bitter compromise, a permanent stain. The myth of Persephone sanctifies the act of taking, turning a violent seizure into a foundational story about the cycles of life and death. It makes the ground beneath your feet feel just a little less solid. The myth of Persephone provides the divine blueprint for abduction. The story of Helen provides the epic, heroic precedent. But what does this mean for you? A regular woman, walking through the very real streets of Athens. The terrifying truth is that these myths were not just stories. They were a reflection of, and a justification for, a harsh reality. In a society where you have few legal rights and are considered the property of your curios, your exceptional beauty makes you a prime target for actual physical abduction and assault by powerful men who often acted with complete impunity. Imagine you are the daughter of a moderately successful craftsman. Your family is not politically powerful. They have no private army or influential relatives in high office. But you have been blessed, or cursed, with a face that turns heads, a beauty that is spoken of in your neighborhood. One day, a wealthy aristocrat, a man from one of the old, powerful families, sees you. At a religious festival, he decides he wants you. He could, perhaps, approach your father and make a formal offer of marriage. But maybe he's already married. Or maybe he just doesn't want the complications of a formal alliance with a family he considers beneath him. He just wants you. So, one evening, as you were walking home from a visit to a relative, accompanied only by a single slave woman, his men ambush you. They are swift and professional. They overpower your companion, muffle your cries, and carry you off to a secluded villa outside the city walls. You are now his captive. What happens next is entirely up to him. What legal recourse does your family have? The answer is very little, and it is fraught with danger. Your father, your Kyrios, could try to bring a case against the abductor, but this is not a simple or straightforward process. He can't just go to the police. There is no professional police force in Athens in the way we think of it. Law enforcement was a largely private affair. To bring a case, your father would have to gather his own evidence, find his own witnesses, who might be too afraid of the powerful man to testify, and then stand before a jury of hundreds of his fellow male citizens to make his argument. He could bring a charge of hybris. This is the same word we encountered earlier, meaning prideful arrogance. In a legal context, hybris meant an act of outrageous arrogance that intentionally dishonored another citizen. The abduction and assault of a man's daughter would certainly qualify. If he wins the case, the penalties for the perpetrator could be severe, including heavy fines or even the loss of citizenship. But it's a huge risk. The wealthy aristocrat will have skilled orators, powerful friends, and a lifetime of public prestige on his side. Your father has only his righteous anger. He could easily lose the case, suffering further public humiliation and potentially crippling financial penalties. Alternatively, he could bring a lesser charge, a grave moikias, which is often translated as adultery, but had a much broader meaning. It covered the assault or seduction of any woman under a man's legal control, his wife, his daughter, his sister. If he won this case, the penalty was typically a fine. The strange and revealing part of this law is how the fine was calculated. It wasn't based on the physical or psychological damage done to you. The fine was compensation paid to your curios for the damage done to his property. Your value, in this legal sense, was diminished, and your father was being reimbursed for his loss. You are not the victim in the eyes of the law. He is. This legal framework created a powerful incentive for silence. Think of the consequences for you and your family if your abduction becomes public knowledge. Your reputation is ruined. You are now damaged goods. Your value on the marriage market has plummeted. No respectable man will want to marry a woman who has been abducted and assaulted, not because of any fault of your own, but because of the public shame attached to the event. Your future is destroyed. Your family's honor is stained. Faced with a risky legal battle and the certainty of social ruin, what would your father do? The most likely, and often the most pragmatic, choice was to do nothing, to swallow the injustice, to keep the secret, and to hope for the best. You might learn about the legal speeches of orators like Liges and Demosthenes. We have collections of them, and they provide a fascinating, if biased, window into the Athenian legal system. What is striking is how rarely cases involving the assault of women are about the woman's experience. The arguments are almost always about male honor, property, and the public order. The woman at the center of the case is a silent object, her body the scene of a crime committed by one man against another. There is a long-standing academic debate about the frequency of these kinds of crimes. Were abduction and assault a common, everyday terror for Athenian women? Or were they rare but shocking events that were sensationalized in myths and court speeches? The nature of the evidence makes it impossible to say for sure. We only have the stories that were told, not the ones that were silenced. Some historians argue that the combination of a weak state, a privatized legal system, and a deeply patriarchal honor culture created a perfect environment for such violence to flourish. Others suggest that social norms, community pressure, and the fear of violent reprisal from victims' male relatives would have acted as a powerful deterrent, keeping such acts in check. The reality for you is that you live with the uncertainty. The law offers you no direct protection. Your safety is entirely dependent on the strength, status, and courage of your curios. If he is weak, or if your aggressor is too strong, you are on your own. Your beauty, in this context, is not just a magnet for divine jealousy, but a practical, terrestrial magnet for violence. It makes you a more tempting prize for those who believe, like Hades and Theseus, that their desire is its own justification. Let's say you manage to avoid the horrors of abduction. You navigate the treacherous waters of your youth, and your curios, your father, does his duty. He arranges a marriage for you. Given your beauty, it's a good match, at least on paper. Your new husband is a wealthy man from a respectable family. You bring a handsome dowry. The contracts are signed. The omens are favorable. You are now a married woman, a giant. You have a new curios, a new home, and a new set of responsibilities. You might think that this is your happy ending, that you have finally found safety and stability. But you soon discover that marriage in this world is not a haven. It is a gilded cage. The primary purpose of your marriage, as we've discussed, is to produce legitimate heirs. Your entire existence in your new home is geared towards this single, crucial function. Your husband has the right to your fidelity, but he is not bound by the same rules. It was socially acceptable, and in many cases expected, For a married man to seek sexual gratification outside of marriage, he might have liaisons with slaves, prostitutes, pornei, or even educated, sophisticated courtesans called hetairai, as the famous orator Demosthenes is quoted as saying, "We have hetairai for pleasure, concubines for the daily care of the body, and wives for the procreation of legitimate children, and to be faithful guardians of our households." It's a stark, functional, and deeply unequal division of labor. Your role is reproduction and household management. His is everything else. Your beauty, which was an asset to your father in securing the marriage, now becomes a complex and often problematic element in your relationship with your husband. On the one hand, he may take pride in it. Having a beautiful wife is a status symbol, like having a fine horse or a well-decorated villa. It reflects well on him, but it is also, as we learned from the ghost of Helen, a source of intense anxiety. He is now the man responsible for guarding you. Your beauty makes his job harder. It makes you a more tempting target for other men, and therefore a greater risk to his honor. This leads to a strange paradox. He desires you to be beautiful for him, in the privacy of your home, but he also needs you to be invisible and unremarkable to the outside world. This is why the customs of modest dress, of binding your hair, of confining yourself to the Guinea sea, don't stop after marriage. They intensify. Your public self-effacement is a service you perform for your husband's peace of mind. And what if you are more than just beautiful? What if you are also intelligent, witty, and knowledgeable about the world? This is an even greater threat. A respectable wife was not expected to be an intellectual companion to her husband. That was the role of the hetairai. Your domain was the lil, the kitchen, and the nursery. To show too much intelligence, to offer an opinion on politics or philosophy, was to overstep your bounds. It was seen as unwomanly and deeply suspicious. A beautiful and intelligent wife was the most dangerous combination of all. Her beauty gave her the power to charm, and her intelligence gave her the power to manipulate. In the eyes of a suspicious husband or a critical society, you could easily be seen as a dangerously subversive figure within your own home. You might learn of a peculiar festival in Athens called the Metamorphoses. It was a multi-day religious festival dedicated to Demeter and Persephone, and it was for women only. For 3 days, the citizen wives of Athens would leave their homes, build shelters on a hillside, and perform secret rites. Men were strictly forbidden from even approaching. It was a rare, sanctioned moment of female solidarity and freedom from male control. During the festival, they would engage in rituals that were a strange mix of mourning and body humor, including something called aiskroologia, or shameful speech, where they would tell obscene jokes and insult each other. It was a temporary, carnivalesque reversal of the usual rules of female modesty and silence. It's a tantalizing glimpse into a separate women's culture that existed alongside the male-dominated public sphere. But it's a stark reminder of how rare such freedom was, that the Metamorphoses was the exception that proved the rule. The scholarly debate over the emotional reality of Greek marriage is endless. Was it a cold, loveless transaction, as the legal and social structures might suggest? Or was there room for genuine affection, love, and partnership? The evidence is contradictory. We have the cynical pronouncements of Demosthenes, but we also have tender epitaphs on tombstones, commissioned by grieving husbands for their departed wives, praising them as loving companions and partners. We have scenes emblazoned on pottery that depict moments of quiet domestic affection. One of the most contested figures in this debate is that of the hetairai. Were they simply high-class prostitutes, or were they something more? Educated, independent women who chose to live outside the restrictive bonds of marriage in order to have intellectual and social freedom. Some scholars view them as the most liberated women in Greek society, the only ones who could participate in the cultural life of the city. Others argue that this romanticizes their position, and that they were still fundamentally dependent on the financial support of powerful men. Their freedom a precarious and often temporary illusion. For you, in your gilded cage, the hetairai represents a strange and unsettling mirror image. She has the freedom you lack, the freedom to walk through the city, to attend symposia, to converse with philosophers. But she lacks the one thing you have: respectability and security. She can never produce legitimate tears for her patrons, and she is always at risk of being abandoned when her beauty or youth fades. You are both trapped, in your own way, by the desires and the structures created by men. Your marriage, you realize, was not an escape from the dangers of being a beautiful woman. It was simply a different way of managing that danger. The cage is comfortable, it is secure, but it is still a cage. Your beauty is the reason for its fine golden bars. You are in your cage. It may be gilded, it may be secure, but it is still a cage. Now, let's imagine the worst happens. Despite all your precautions, despite your husband's vigilance, a man, perhaps a powerful neighbor, a guest at a symposium, or even a relative, violates you. The act itself is a moment of terror and trauma, but the silence that follows is a different kind of horror, a heavy, suffocating blanket of shame and fear. Why don't you scream? Why don't you run to your husband and tell him? Because in this world, the consequences of speaking out are often as devastating as the act itself. The first and most powerful reason for silence is the concept of miasma. This is a Greek word that means pollution or stain. It's not a physical dirtiness, but a kind of spiritual contamination. Miasma resulted from certain acts that were seen as deeply offensive to the gods and disruptive to the community. Murder, sacrilege, and, crucially, any violation of the sexual order. When you are assaulted, a miasma is created, but the pollution doesn't just attach to the perpetrator. In the eyes of society, it attaches to you. Your body, which was supposed to be the pure and exclusive vessel for your husband's lineage, has been contaminated. You are now a source of this spiritual stain. Your very presence could bring bad luck and divine disfavor upon your entire household. This is a terrifyingly effective to love victim blaming. The shame of the assault is transmuted into a quasi-religious state of impurity that you are now responsible for. To reveal what happened is to reveal that you are a source of miasma, risking not just your own reputation, but the spiritual well-being of your entire family. If you were to tell your husband, what would his reaction be? According to the strict letter of Athenian law, he would be required to divorce you. A man could not, by law, remain married to a woman who had been the victim of adultery or assault once the fact was made public. To do so would risk his own citizenship rights. The law was designed to protect the purity of the citizen bloodline. A polluted woman could not be allowed to continue bearing children who would inherit citizen rights. So, by speaking out, you would not only be revealing your shame, but you would also be legally obligating your husband to cast you out of his home. Where would you go? You would be sent back to your father's house, or to the house of whatever male relative was now your Kyrios. You would be a divorced woman, the pariah. Your dowry would have to be returned by your husband's family, which could cause a bitter financial dispute between the two families. You would become a source of profound shame and economic hardship for your own kin. Your chances of ever marrying again would be zero. You would live out your days in a state of disgrace, a constant, living reminder of the dishonor brought upon your family. Faced with these consequences, is it any wonder that silence often seemed like the only rational choice? You might hear whispers about the trial of a man named Diue Philetos, a story immortalized in a speech by the orator Lysias. Diue Philetos came home to find his wife with another man, Eratosthenes, as was his legal right. Diue Philetos killed Eratosthenes on the spot. He was later put on trial for murder by Eratosthenes' family. The speech Lysias wrote for Philetos' defense is a masterpiece of rhetoric. He argues that his act was not one of passion, but a lawful act to protect the integrity of the state and the sanctity of his home. The interesting part is how he talks about his wife. He portrays her as weak, easily seduced, and foolish. She is the gullible instrument of Eratosthenes' crime. Her role in the affair is what condemns Eratosthenes, but she herself is treated not as a co-conspirator, but as a faulty piece of property that allowed the trespass to happen. We never learn what happened to her, but we can guess. Divorce and disgrace One of the strangest and most debated aspects of this whole dynamic is the perceived difference between assault and seduction. In the eyes of Athenian law and society, seduction was often considered a more serious crime than a violent assault. The logic is perverse but revealing. A man who assaults a woman merely violates her body, but a man who seduces a woman corrupts her mind. He has persuaded her to be a willing participant in the betrayal of her husband. This makes him a greater threat because he has gained control over the inner workings of the household, potentially turning the wife against her curios. A raped woman is a damaged object. A seduced woman is a traitor. This bizarre legal reasoning placed a woman who might have willingly entered an affair in an even more precarious position than one who was brutally attacked. Scholars still argue about how this played out in reality. Did jurors and husbands really adhere to this cold, hard logic, or was there more room for compassion and understanding in private? Some argue that the legal texts present the most extreme, rigid view and that many families would have found ways to quietly manage such a crisis without resorting to public exposure and divorce. The honor of the family might be better served by a shared secret than by a public scandal. This is the ideology versus reality debate once again. The legal and social ideology demanded exposure and punishment. The practical reality of preserving a family's reputation might have demanded the exact opposite. The pact of total, absolute silence. This is the crushing weight you live under. Your voice has been taken from you, not just by law, but by a powerful social consensus enforced by concepts like miasma and the fear of public shame. To speak your trauma is to risk losing everything: your home, your family, your future. The system is designed to make you complicit in your own silencing. Your beauty might have made you a target, but it is the structure of society itself that ensures the wound is left to fester in the dark. The fear of the gods, the anxiety of your husband, the silence imposed by the law. These are all heavy burdens, but there's another, more insidious danger you have to contend with. It comes not from the heavens or the law courts, but from the minds of the most respected thinkers of your age, the philosophers. And their great contribution to your growing list of existential threats is a simple, powerful, and deeply suspicious idea that your beauty is probably a lie. You find yourself lingering at the edge of the agora, listening to a group of intense-looking men clustered around a charismatic teacher. The words that drift over are form, ideal, shadows, and reality. You are listening to the echoes of the most influential philosopher of them all, Plato. And Plato has a serious problem with the physical world. For him, the world that you can see, touch, and hear is not the real world. It's a pale, imperfect, and deceptive shadow of a higher reality, the world of the forms or ideas. In this higher, eternal, and unchanging reality, there exists the perfect idea of a chair, the perfect idea of a tree, and the perfect idea of justice. The chairs and trees you see around you are just flawed copies. Now, apply this logic to the human body. Your physical beauty, no matter how perfect it may seem, is part of this shadowy, deceptive world. It is, by its very nature, a flawed copy of the true, ideal form of beauty, which exists only in that higher, intellectual realm and can only be perceived through reason, not through the senses. Therefore, your face, your body, your captivating appearance, it's not just imperfect, it's a potential distraction. It's a sensory trap that can trick a foolish man into thinking he has found true beauty, when in fact he is just staring at a fleeting, mortal, and ultimately insignificant shadow. This philosophical worldview creates a fundamental distrust of physical appearance. It introduces a mind-body dualism where the soul and the intellect are seen as pure and good, while the body and its appetites are seen as base, corruptible, and a source of error. And since women in Greek thought were almost universally associated more with the body, with emotion, and with the physical world, while men were associated with the mind, with reason, and with the soul, this philosophy has a distinctly gendered outcome. Your beauty becomes exhibit A in the case against the reliability of the senses. Plato's student, Aristotle, took a different, more scientific approach, but the result for you was no better. He wasn't as concerned with a world of forms, But he was obsessed with biology and classification. In his view of reproduction, the male provided the form and the principle of movement, while the female provided only the matter. The man provided the active, creative spark. You provided the passive, raw material. He famously described the female as a deformed male or an incomplete male, a result of a defect in the generative process. According to his logic, if everything had gone perfectly, you would have been born a man. This kind of scientific thinking provides a powerful justification for the social order. If women are biologically inferior, incomplete versions of men, then it makes perfect sense that they should be ruled by men, confined to the home, and excluded from public life. It's not just a social custom. It's the natural order of things. Your beauty, in this context, is just a pleasing feature of an inherently flawed and inferior being. It's a decorative quality, not a sign of any inner worth. You might overhear a discussion about one of Socrates' more famous dialogues, where he supposedly recounts the teachings of a wise woman named Diotima of Mantinia. Diotima teaches Socrates about the true nature of love and beauty, explaining how one should ascend from the love of a beautiful body to the love of all beautiful bodies, then to the love of beautiful souls, beautiful laws, beautiful ideas, and finally, to a vision of the form of beauty itself. It's a beautiful philosophical concept, this ladder of love, but notice its trajectory. It always moves away from you. Love for a beautiful woman like yourself is the lowest, most primitive rung on the ladder. It's the starting point that a true philosopher must transcend and leave behind in his quest for real knowledge. Your beauty is the kindergarten of love, a necessary first step, perhaps, but ultimately childish and insignificant. This philosophical suspicion of beauty leads to a very dangerous place. If outer beauty is not a reliable indicator of inner goodness, a direct contradiction of the old Kalokaga Thea principle, then the opposite might also be true. A beautiful exterior could be a mask, a clever disguise hiding a corrupt, deceptive, or manipulative soul. This is where your intelligence becomes a liability. A beautiful woman who is also smart and articulate is terrifying. She has the perfect weapon, her looks, and the skill to wield it. Her mind. She is no longer just a pretty object. She is a master of deception, using her God-given charms to trick and manipulate foolish men. The academic debate here is fascinating. To what extent did these high-minded philosophical ideas actually trickle down and influence the average Athenian citizen? Did the man selling fish in the Agora really worry about the Platonic forms? Probably not in those terms. But scholars argue that these philosophical currents reflected and reinforced a widespread cultural misogyny. The philosophers gave a sophisticated, intellectual justification for anxieties and prejudices that were already present in the culture. They took the vague, mythological fear of the dangerous woman, a Huon, a Kilton Demis, and repackaged it in the language of reason, logic, and biology. So, you are now facing a new kind of accusation. It's not that you have angered the gods. It's not that you have dishonored your husband. It's that you are, by your very nature, a lie. Your beauty is a fiction. Your mind is a weapon, and your soul is suspect. The very men who are celebrated for creating the foundations of Western logic and reason have concluded that you are not to be trusted, and their words carry enormous weight, echoing in the halls of power and shaping the education of the next generation of men who will write the laws and control your world. The philosophers have given you the theory. A beautiful exterior can hide a corrupt interior. It's a dangerous idea, a seed of suspicion planted in the culture. But where did this idea come from? It's much older than Plato. To find its roots, you have to go back to the very beginning, to the story of the first woman ever created. And in the Greek version of that story, she is not a helpmeet or a companion. She is a punishment. She is a trap. And her name is Pandora. You hear her story from the poet Hesiod, the same grim-faced poet who told you of Aphrodite's violent birth. His telling of the myth, in his work The Ognian Works and Days, is the definitive account, and it is drenched in a deepened, profound misogyny. The story begins not with creation, but with a conflict between the gods and humanity, personified by the clever Titan, Prometheus, Prometheus struck Zeus, the king of the gods, and then, in an act of defiance, he stole fire from the heavens and gave it to mortal men. Zeus was incandescent with rage. He punished Prometheus with eternal torment, chaining him to a mountain where an eagle would eat his liver every day. But his revenge wasn't complete. He felt that humanity, the beneficiaries of this stolen fire, also needed to be punished. He decided to give them a gift that would be their undoing. And this gift was a woman. Zeus commanded the gods to work together to create this, saying, Hephaestus, the smith god, was to mold her from earth and water, giving her the form of a modest maiden. Athena was to clothe her in shimmering garments and teach her the womanly craft of weaving. The graces in persuasion were to adorn her with golden necklaces. And Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, was to shed grace upon her head, and cruel longing and cares that weary the limbs. But the most important contributions came from Zeus and Hermes. Hermes, the trickster god, was instructed to give her the mind of a bitch and a thievish nature, and Zeus himself breathed life into her. He named her Pandora, which means all gifted, because all the gods had given her a gift to contribute to her creation. Let that sink in. She is engineered from the ground up to be a disaster. She is given the outward appearance of beauty, grace, and modesty. But this is merely the packaging, the operating system. The software installed by Hermes and Zeus is one of deceit, treachery, and cunning. She is the original Trojan horse, a beautiful object designed to infiltrate the world of men and destroy it from within. Hesiod explicitly calls her Kaon, a beautiful evil. The two words are meant to be a shocking and inseparable paradox. Her beauty is her evil is her beauty. They are one and the same. She is then presented to Epimetheus, the slow-witted brother of Prometheus. Prometheus, whose name means forethought, had warned his brother never to accept a gift from Zeus. But Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought, was dazzled by Pandora's beauty. He saw the beautiful package and forgot the warning. He accepted her into his home, and with her, Pandora brought a jar, or a pith-os. In later traditions, this becomes the famous Pandora's box. The gods had given her this jar and told her never to open it. But of course, they had also given her a curious and deceitful nature. So, inevitably, she opened it, and from the jar flew out all the evils that have plagued humanity ever since. Sickness, death, sorrow, toil, and 1,000 other miseries. In a panic, she slammed the lid shut, but it was too late. All the evils had escaped. The only thing left trapped inside the jar was BLP, the spirit of hope. This myth is the cornerstone of Greek misogyny. It establishes, at the very beginning of the human story, that woman is not an essential part of humanity, but a later, vengeful addition. It defines the female nature as inherently deceptive, and it lays the blame for all the suffering in the world squarely at her feet. It is the ultimate act of cosmic victim blaming. You might learn a small but fascinating detail about the pith-os, the jar. A pith-os in ancient Greece was a large earthenware storage jar, often partially buried in the ground, used to store essential supplies like wine, olive oil, or grain. It was a symbol of the household's sustenance and survival. The fact that the evils of the world emerged from a domestic storage jar, an object firmly within the woman's sphere of the Guinea Seal, is deeply symbolic. It suggests that the threat, the corruption, comes from the very heart of the whole, from the woman herself. Scholars have long debated the meaning of hope being left in the jar. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? The optimistic reading is that even though the world is full of evils, humanity still has hope to get us through. It's the one small consolation prize. But there's a more pessimistic and, some would say, more authentically Greek reading. Hesiod lists hope alongside all the other evils. In this view, hope is not a comfort. It's the cruelest of all the evils. It's the blind hope that keeps humans toiling away in their miserable lives, preventing them from accepting their grim reality. It's the delusion that things might get better, which only prolongs the suffering. The academic world is still deeply divided on which interpretation Hesiod intended. The story of Pandora provides the foundational myth for the suspicion that Plato and other philosophers later intellectualized. The beautiful woman is a kaon. She is a trout. This is not just one story among many. It is the story. It's what every Greek man would have learned as a child. It informs the cultural DNA. So when a man looks at you, a beautiful woman, he's not just seeing you. He's seeing Pandora. He's seeing the potential for deception, the risk of ruin, the beautiful face on the jar full of plagues. Your beauty isn't just a distraction from the Platonic forms. It is the living echo of the original sin, the original disaster, that was visited upon man by a vengeful god. The myths of Pandora, Helen, and Medusa create a powerful archetype, the beautiful woman as a source of chaos and destruction. The philosophers provide the intellectual framework for suspecting her, but these are just stories and ideas. Does this suspicion ever attach itself to a real, historical person? The answer is a resounding yes, and her name is Aspasia of Miletus. You are in Athens during its golden age, the mid-5th century BC. The Parthenon is under construction on the Acropolis, a gleaming testament to the city's power and confidence. The city is led by the charismatic and dominant statesman, Pericles, and on his arm, at his side, and in his home, is a woman who breaks every single rule we've discussed. That woman is Aspasia. She was not an Athenian. She was from Miletus, a Greek city in Ionia, modern-day Turkey, known for its long tradition of intellectual and philosophical inquiry. She came to Athens as a foreigner, a metic, which meant she had fewer rights than an Athenian citizen woman, but ironically, also fewer restrictions, because she was not bound by the conventions of a respectable Athenian wife. She did not live in the seclusion of the Geniceum. She moved freely through the city. She was brilliant, educated, and a famously skilled conversationalist and rhetorician. And, by all accounts, she was also exceptionally beautiful and charming. She became the lover and, for all intents and purposes, the partner of Pericles, the most powerful man in Athens. This was a scandal. Pericles was already married to an Athenian woman, with whom he had 2 sons. He took the radical and shocking step of divorcing his citizen wife to live with this foreign woman. Because Aspasia was not an Athenian, he could not legally marry her under his own citizenship laws. But they lived together as a couple, and he treated her as his wife. He was, by all accounts, devoted to her, and was said to kiss her every day when he left for and returned from the Agora. This was an explosive situation. Pericles' political enemies, and there were many, could not attack him directly on his policies, as he was too popular, so they attacked him through her. Aspasia became the lightning rod for all the anxieties and prejudices of Athenian society. She was beautiful, she was intelligent, she was a foreigner, and she had unprecedented influence over the most powerful man in the state. She was Pandora, Helen, and a siren all rolled into one. The comic playwrights, the political satirists of their day, had a field day. In their plays, they mercilessly mocked her. They accused her of being a common brothel keeper, a pornoboscoess, and of running a house of ill repute staffed by high-class prostitutes. They claimed she taught Pericles his speeches, essentially accusing him of being her puppet. The most damaging accusation was that she had used her seductive influence over Pericles to push Athens into wars for her own personal or political reasons. For example, they blamed her for instigating the Samian War, arguing that it was fought to benefit her home city of Miletus. This is a direct echo of the Helen of Troy narrative, a catastrophic war being blamed on the influence of a beautiful woman over a powerful man. The attacks grew so vicious that Aspasia was eventually put on trial. The official charges were impiety, BBRA, and procuring women for Pericles. Impiety was a serious, catch-all charge used to prosecute those who deviated from social and religious norms. The philosopher Socrates would later be executed on the same charge. The trial was a political circus, a show trial designed to humiliate Pericles. The story goes that Pericles himself had to defend her in court, and that this famously stoic and reserved statesman broke down in tears, begging the jury of 501 male citizens for her life. The jury, perhaps moved by Pericles' display or unwilling to deal him such a direct blow, acquitted her. You might stumble upon a curious detail regarding her profession. While her enemies called her a brothel keeper and a prostitute, some later writers, including Plato and Xenophon, seem to treat her with a strange kind of respect. Socrates himself is said to have visited her, bringing his students to listen to her discourse. This has led to a major historical debate. What, exactly, was she? Was she a Hetaira, a high-class court saint who offered intellectual and physical companionship? Or was she something else entirely, a kind of private teacher or salon hostess, an intellectual figure in her own right who has been slandered by history? This is a fierce point of contention among classicists. Some scholars insist that we must take the contemporary comic sources at their word. She was involved in the sex trade, and to deny this is to sanitize history. They argue that her intellectual reputation was a later invention by philosophers to give their own ideas a more exotic or authoritative source. Other scholars argue the opposite. They claim that the comic playwrights were notorious for slander and exaggeration, and that it's unfair to take their politically motivated attacks as literal truth. They believe that Aspasia was a genuine intellectual, a female sophist, and that the accusations of prostitution were the only way her male contemporaries could understand or categorize a woman who was so intelligent, public, and powerful. She didn't fit any of their boxes, so they forced her into the only one they had for a woman who was not a respectable, secluded wife, the Hetaira, regardless of her true profession. The story of Aspasia is a perfect case study. It demonstrates how a real woman's life could be forced to fit the contours of a negative mythological archetype. Because she was beautiful and intelligent, her enemies could successfully portray her as a deceptive manipulator. Because she was influential, they could cast her as a new Helen, dragging the city into war. The accusations against her were not random insults. They were drawn from a deep cultural well of misogynistic tropes. She is the living proof that in Athens, if you were a woman who was too beautiful, too smart, and too powerful, society would find a way to try and tear you down, using the well-worn stories of the gods and heroes as their script. The accusations against Aspasia were political, couched in the language of sex and war. But there was another, stranger, and more primal accusation lurking beneath the surface. The idea that her power wasn't just due to her intelligence or charm, but to something more supernatural. The belief that overwhelming, irresistible beauty could be a form of magic. You're in a dusty, cluttered shop in a back alley of Athens. The air is thick with the scent of dried herbs, minerals, and something faintly metallic. The shopkeeper is a wise woman, a seller of remedies and charms. Here you can buy poultices for aches, amulets to ward off the evil eye, and, most importantly, love potions. These concoctions, known as philosophies, the root of our word filter, were a very real part of the Greek world. They were mixtures of herbs, spices, and sometimes more disturbing ingredients, believed to be able to magically induce love or passion in a person against their will. The use of philosophies was a legal and social minefield. On the one hand, they were common. People sought them out. On the other hand, to administer a potion to someone was a serious crime, legally considered a form of assault. The law recognized that these potions were intended to override a person's reason and free will, and if a potion accidentally resulted in sickness or death, the person who administered it could be tried for murder. This is where your beauty becomes entangled with the world of magic and poison. The Greek word for these magical drugs was pharmaka, and as you might remember from the pharmakos or scapegoat ritual, it's a deeply ambiguous word. A pharmakon can be a healing medicine, a deadly poison, or a magic potion. It's a substance that has the power to alter the body and mind in mysterious ways. And your beauty, in the eyes of a suspicious public, could be seen as a kind of living pharmakon. How could a man be so utterly captivated by a woman, so willing to abandon his family like Pericles, or risk war like Paris? It's easier for some people to believe it wasn't a natural emotion. He must have been bewitched. She must have used a far make-on him. The woman herself, her face, her voice, her charm, becomes the potion. Her beauty is not a natural attribute. It is a form of witchcraft. You see this idea crop up in mythology. The most famous female magic user in the Greek world is Circe. The sorceries from Homer's Odyssey. When Odysseus's men land on her island, she welcomes them into her home, offers them a feast, and sings with a bewitching voice. But she has mixed a far make-on into their food and wine. After they have eaten, she taps them with her wand and turns them into pigs. It's a classic scene of female magical deception. She uses the trappings of hospitality and her beautiful voice to lure men into a trap, then uses her drugs to strip them of their humanity. Her power is a combination of charm and chemistry. Another powerful sorcery was Medea, the woman who helped the hero Jason steal the golden fleece. She was a priestess of the goddess Hecate, the patroness of witchcraft. Our bar came from her deep knowledge of herbs and potions. She could make men fall in love, put dragons to sleep, and even rejuvenate the old. But her magic was always dangerous and often deadly. Like Circe, she was a foreign woman from cultures on the Black Sea, and her beauty was an integral part of her mystique and her power. The magical foreign in cancers is a recurring archetype. You might discover a very strange and specific type of magic that was practiced in Athens. Curse tablets. These were thin sheets of lead, inscribed with a curse against an enemy or a rival. The curse would invoke various underworld gods and spirits, asking them to bind or disable the victim. Archaeologists have found hundreds of these tablets, often discovered in wells or buried in graves, places thought to provide a direct channel to the Thannoic deities. And a significant number of these curses are what we would call erotic or binding spells. A man, consumed by desire for a woman, would write her name on a tablet, along with a spell designed to bind her to him, to prevent her from being with any other man, and to force her to desire him. This is the flip side of the love potion anxiety. While people feared that women were using magic to ensnare men, men were very much using magic to try and control women. It reveals a deep-seated belief that love and desire were a kind of cosmic battlefield, where supernatural forces could be deployed to gain an advantage. The scholarly debate on this topic is about interpretation. When the sources accuse a woman like Aspasia of bewitching Pericles, are they speaking literally or metaphorically? Did her enemies actually believe she was a witch who had slipped him a potion? Or were they using the language of magic as a powerful metaphor to describe a charm and influence that they found unnatural and inexplicable? Most historians believe it was primarily metaphorical, a way to pathologize a woman's power by placing it in the realm of the irrational and the sinister. To accuse a woman of witchcraft was to deny her agency and intellect. Her power wasn't the result of her own brilliant mind. It was the result of a dark, external force working through her. So now you have a new label to fear. Witch, sorceress, user of pharmaca. If your beauty is too effective, if a man's devotion to you is too absolute, it can be framed as evidence of a crime. Your natural charisma can be interpreted as a supernatural assault. You are not just a liar in the Platonic sense, or a beautiful evil in the Hesiodicee sense. You are a potential criminal, a practitioner of forbidden arts, whose very face might be the most potent and dangerous potion of all. You've seen how beauty can be interpreted as a sin, a provocation, a lie, or a form of magic. It has been a constant liability, a source of danger, at every turn. But what if, in one extraordinary moment, it could be the opposite? What if that same beauty, which has been the cause of all your troubles, could be your only salvation? This brings us to the legendary courtroom drama of Fry, the most famous and most controversial legal case in all of ancient Athens. Fry was a real historical figure who lived in the 4th century BCE. She was a Hetaira, and by all accounts, one of the most successful and celebrated of her time. Her real name was Mensuri, but she was given the nickname Fry, meaning toad, which was a common, often cruel, nickname for courtesans, possibly because of her yellowish complexion. Despite the unflattering name, she was renowned for a beauty so perfect that she became the model for some of the most famous artists and sculptors of the age. The great sculptor Praxiteles is said to have used her as the model for his revolutionary statue, the Aphrodite of Abydos, the first major cult statue of a goddess to be depicted completely nude. The famous painter Apelles also allegedly used her as the model for his masterpiece, Aphrodite and Adiomi, which depicted the goddess rising from the sea foam. Phryne was wealthy, famous, and moved in the highest intellectual and artistic circles. But like Aspasia, her success and her public profile made her a target. She was put on trial for her life. The exact charges are debated by historians, but the most commonly cited accusation was, once again, empathy. Her prosecutor, a man named Eurystheus, accused her of profaning the Eleusinian mysteries, one of Athens' most sacred religious rituals. He may have also accused her of corrupting the youth of Athens. It was a capital crime. If convicted, she would be executed. Her defense was led by one of the most brilliant orators of the day, a man named Hyperides, who was also said to be one of her lovers. The trial took place before a large jury in the Heliia, the great law court of Athens. Hyperides made his arguments, but he could see that the jury was unmoved. The prosecution's case was strong, and the prejudice against a woman like Phryne was stronger. The tide of opinion was against her. The jurors were ready to convict. This is where the story takes its dramatic, and possibly fictional, turn. In a last, desperate gamble, as he was making his final play, Hyperides did something unprecedented. He walked over to Phryne, and in full view of the entire court, he dramatically ripped open her tunic, exposing her breasts to the jury. He then turned to the jurors and asked them if they could bring themselves to condemn to death such a perfect vessel, a woman who was the living model of the goddess of beauty herself. He wasn't just showing them a beautiful woman, he was showing them, in his view, a living manifestation of the divine. To execute her, he argued, would be an act of sacrilege against Aphrodite. The effect was electric. The jurors, composed of hundreds of ordinary Athenian men, were said to have been seized by a superstitious fear. They were so awestruck, so shaken by this sudden, dramatic revelation, that they voted to acquit her. Her beauty, laid bare, became her ultimate defense. It was not an argument, it was an irrefutable, divine revelation that short-circuited the legal process entirely. Now, did this actually happen? This is one of the great It's a Good Story, but is it true debates among classicists. The story is not told by contemporary sources, but by later writers, like the Roman rhetorician Quintilian and the Greek writer Athenaius, who were writing hundreds of years after the event. It's entirely possible that the story is a later invention, a piece of rhetorical folklore created to illustrate the power of dramatic courtroom tactics and the supposed susceptibility of Athenian juries to emotional appeals. The scholarly debate is fierce. One side argues that the story is plausible. Athenian courtrooms were known for their theatrics. Defendants would often bring their weeping children and wives to court to elicit sympathy. In a society that believed gods could walk the earth and that beauty was a reflection of the divine, the idea that a jury could be swayed by such a display is not entirely out of the question. The other side argues that it's almost certainly a fiction. They contend that it's a sexist fantasy that portrays the Athenian legal system as irrational and easily manipulated by a pretty face and body. They suggest that Hyperides likely won the case with his brilliant legal arguments, and the story of the disrobing was invented later to spice up the tale. There's a fascinating, lesser-known detail that adds a layer of complexity to Phryne's story. She was said to be very careful about her public appearance. She rarely bathed in the public baths and always wore clothing that concealed her figure, revealing her beauty only to a select few. This makes the alleged courtroom disrobing even more dramatic. It was a shocking violation of her own carefully maintained public persona. One story claims that the only time she willingly revealed her full nudity to the public was during the festival of the Eleusinian, where she would walk into the sea and reenact the birth of Aphrodite. This, in fact, may have been the very act that formed the basis of the empty charge against her, that a mortal courtesan was daring to impersonate a goddess. If this is true, it creates a perfect, beautiful irony. The very act that got her into trouble, the public display of her divine beauty, became the instrument of her salvation. The crime and the defense were one and the same. The story of Fry, whether fact or fiction, became a legend. It represents the ultimate, paradoxical triumph of beauty in a world that is so deeply suspicious of it. For once, beauty was not a liability. It was an active, powerful agent. It was a defense, a weapon, an argument that transcended words. But it's a deeply unsettling victory. It suggests that a woman's body can be more persuasive than her lawyer's words, that her worth can be adjudicated based on a sudden, shocking display. It bypasses justice and goes straight for all. It's a victory, yes, but a victory that reaffirms the very objectification that caused all the problems in the first place. So far, our journey has been almost entirely within the walls of Athens, a world of secluded wives, suspicious philosophers, and dramatic court cases. It's easy to think that this Athenian experience, this specific blend of democracy, patriarchy, and philosophical misogyny, was the Greek experience, but it wasn't. To understand the full picture, you have to take a trip. You have to travel south, over the rugged mountains, to a place that was Athens' great rival. Its polar opposite in almost every way. You have to go to Sparta. As you approach the valley of the Eurotas River, the first thing you notice is what isn't there. There are no grand city walls like in Athens. There are no magnificent temples dominating the skyline. Sparta is not a city of marble and monuments. It is a collection of villages, an armed camp masquerading as a city. The Spartans famously said that their walls were the chests of their young men. Their entire society was a military machine, and this fundamental difference created a radically different world for women. You see a group of girls exercising in a field. They are not in seclusion. They are wrestling, running, and throwing the discus and javelin. Just like the boys, they are strong, sunt and remarkably free in their movements. They wear a simple, short tunic called a peplos, but it's a version unique to Sparta. It's cut high on the thigh and open at the side, earning them the nickname phainomrides, or thigh showers, from the other, more modest Greeks. The Athenians saw this as scandalous and promiscuous. The Spartans saw it as practical. This is your first clue that the rules are different here. In Sparta, a woman's primary duty was not just to produce heirs, but to produce strong, healthy heirs who could become the best soldiers in Greece. The health of the state depended on the health of its mothers. Therefore, girls received a state-sponsored education that was just as focused on physical fitness as the boys was. The belief, as articulated by the writer Xenophon, an Athenian who admired Sparta, was that if both parents were strong, their children would be stronger. It was a society obsessed with eugenics, and that obsession, paradoxically, gave women a level of physical freedom unheard of in Athens. You learn that Spartan women also had far more economic power. Unlike in Athens, where women could not own property, Spartan women could, and did, inherit and own land, because the Spartan men were full-time soldiers, often living in barracks or away on campaign. The women were left to manage the large agricultural estates, the kaleroi, that formed the basis of Spartan wealth. They ran the households, supervised the helots, the enslaved population that worked the land, and controlled the family finances. By the time of Aristotle, it was estimated that women owned as much as 2/5 of all the land in Sparta. This gave them an economic independence and influence that would have been unthinkable to their Athenian counterparts. Her beauty, in this context, is judged by a different standard, while looks were still appreciated. The ultimate measure of a woman's worth was her health, her strength, and her ability to bear strong children. A beautiful face on a weak body was of little value to the Spartan state. This focus on function over pure aesthetics meant that the kind of obsessive, paralyzing anxiety about beauty that permeated Athens was largely absent here. A woman's body was not a fragile, dangerous subject to be hidden away. It was a vital piece of state infrastructure, and it needed to be trained and maintained. You might hear a story about Gorgo, the wife of the famous King Leonidas, when a woman from another city asked her, "Why are you Spartan women the only ones who can rule men?" Gorgo's legendary reply was, "Because we are also the only ones who give birth to men." This apocryphal quote, whether she actually said it or not, perfectly encapsulates the source of Spartan women's power and pride. Their status was directly linked to their role as the mothers of elite warriors. However, it's crucial not to romanticize this. The Spartan system was not a feminist utopia. It was a brutal, totalitarian military state. The freedom and status enjoyed by Spartan women were built on the backs of the helots, a vast population of brutally oppressed serfs who lived in constant fear of the Spartan secret police. A Spartan woman's life was better than an Athenian woman's in many respects, but it was still a life dedicated entirely to the service of a relentless and unforgiving state. Her body was not her own. It belonged to Sparta. There's a significant historical debate about the true nature of Spartan society. Our main sources of information, writers like Herodotus, Thucydides, Xenophon, and Plutarch, were almost all outsiders, mostly Athenians. They were looking at Sparta through a lens of either fear, envy, or admiration. They were often creating what is now called the Spartan mirage, an idealized or distorted image of Sparta used to critique or praise their own societies. How much of what they wrote was accurate, and how much was propaganda or misunderstanding? For example, the Athenian playwright Euripides, in his plays, consistently portrays Spartan women as wild, promiscuous, and undisciplined, a clear reflection of Athenian prejudice. Xenophon, on the other hand, presents them as models of virtue and health. The archaeological evidence from Sparta is frustratingly sparse compared to Athens, making it difficult to verify many of the claims made in the texts. This ongoing debate means that our understanding of Spartan women is constantly being reevaluated. As we try to peel back the layers of the mirage to get to the historical reality, leaving Sparta and heading back towards Athens, you are left with a powerful sense of contrast. The Athenian model, which we've explored in such detail, was not the only way. Sparta shows that a different set of social priorities could lead to a completely different outcome for women and for the valuation of their beauty. The Spartan woman was not a Kaon, a beautiful evil. She was a partner in a grim, collective enterprise. Her beauty was secondary to her function. Her cage was not a secluded room in the back of a house. It was the entire state of Sparta itself. It was a different kind of prison, perhaps with more room to exercise, but a prison nonetheless. This realization complicates your understanding of the Greek world, reminding you that there was no single cruel beauty, but many, each shaped by the unique fears and obsessions of the society that created it. As you leave the strange, austere world of Sparta behind, in the familiar silhouette of the Acropolis reappears on the horizon. You start to see the connections, the threads that run from the myths of the gods down to the philosophy, the lore, and the social anxieties of Athens are all part of a single, complex tapestry. You begin to understand that the curse of beauty in ancient Greece wasn't just one thing. It was a multifaceted prism of dangers, reflecting fears of divine power, social chaos, and female autonomy. And now, you realize that the story doesn't end here. The echoes of this curse, the anxieties first articulated in these ancient cities, will reverberate for centuries, shaping the cultural attitudes of the Western world long after the last column has crumbled. The Romans, who conquered Greece and absorbed its culture, were the first and most direct inheritors of these ideas. They adopted the Greek gods, giving them Roman names. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, and the terrifying Aphrodite was repackaged as the slightly more maternal, but still formidable, Venus. They read the Greek poets and philosophers. The story of Helen of Troy was as well known in Rome as it was in Athens. The Roman poet Ovid, as we've seen, was the one who gave us the definitive, tragic backstory of Medusa. The Roman satirist Juvenal wrote scathingly about the trouble with wives, complaining about their vanity, their extravagance, and their pretensions to learning, echoing the same complaints made by Athenian comic playwrights centuries earlier. The Kalaon, the beautiful evil of Pandora, found a new home in the Roman imagination. Then came the rise of a new religion, Christianity. The early church fathers, in their struggle to define Christian doctrine, were often deeply influenced by Greek philosophy, particularly Platonism. The Platonic suspicion of the physical world, the idea that the body is a corrupting prison for the soul, fit neatly with certain ascetic Christian teachings. This led to a powerful tradition of denigrating the body and its desires. And once again, women and their beauty bore the brunt of this suspicion. Think of the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. In many ways, it's a parallel to the story of Pandora. Eve, the first woman, is tempted by a serpent and leads Adam, the first man, into sin through her actions. Humanity is cast out of paradise and condemned to a life of toil and mortality. Like Pandora, Eve becomes the scapegoat for all of human suffering. Early Christian writers like Tertullian famously called women the devil's gateway, blaming their beauty and charm for leading men into sin. Your beauty, which the Greeks feared would provoke the jealousy of the gods, was now feared because it could provoke the lust of men and lead to the damnation of their souls. The danger shifted from the divine to the demonic. But the fundamental suspicion of female beauty remained the same. This legacy continued through the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. The witch hunts that swept through Europe in the early modern period were, in many ways, a terrifyingly literal manifestation of the old Greek fear of the beautiful sorceries. The women who were most often accused of witchcraft were not always old crones, but sometimes women who were too independent, too knowledgeable about herbs, pharmaca, or whose beauty was seen as an unnatural and therefore diabolical to love seduction. You might stumble upon a fascinating but dark historical document called the Malleus Maleficum, or the Hammer of Witches, first published in 1487. It was a kind of guidebook for witch hunters, written by a German Catholic clergyman. The book is filled with a venomous misogyny that Hesiod would have recognized. It argues that women are more susceptible to demonic temptations than men because they are more carnal, more impressionable, and intellectually like children. An idea taken straight from the playbook of Aristotle. It explicitly connects witchcraft with female sexuality and attractiveness. The curse of Aspasia and Phryne, that their intelligence and charm were a form of magic, became codified in a manual that led to the deaths of thousands of real women. The historical debate around the legacy of these ideas is central to the study of Western cultural history. To what extent can we draw a straight line from ancient Greece to modern attitudes? Some historians are cautious, pointing out the vast differences in context and the many other cultural forces at play, like Germanic and Celtic traditions. They warn against creating an overly simplistic narrative of direct inheritance. Others argue that while the line may not be perfectly straight, the fundamental archetypes and anxieties established in the Greek world have shown a remarkable and disturbing persistence. The idea of the femme fatale, the beautiful woman who leads men to their doom, is a staple of Western art, literature, and film, a direct descendant of Helen and Cleopatra. The suspicion of a beautiful woman who is also too smart is a prejudice that has lingered for centuries. As you stand on a hill overlooking the modern city of Athens, with the ancient ruins scattered below, you see the long shadow that this civilization has cast. The principles of democracy, the philosophical inquiries, the artistic ideals, they are all part of its celebrated legacy. But alongside them is this other, darker inheritance, a deep-seated anxiety about female beauty, a tendency to blame women for male violence, and a philosophical tradition that often denigrated the female and the physical. The curse you experienced in these ancient streets wasn't just a local phenomenon, it was a cultural virus, and you have just witnessed its point of origin. The story of cruel beauty didn't end with the fall of Greece. It was just getting started. The day is ending. Your journey through the treacherous landscape of Greek beauty is also coming to a close. There is one last place you must go. You make the slow, steady climb up the sacred rock of the Acropolis. The path is steep, worn smooth by the feet of millions over millennia. As you ascend, the sounds of the city below, the chatter, the commerce, the life, begin to fade, replaced by the sigh of the wind that always seems to be sweeping across this high place. You pass through the propylaea, the monumental gateway, and the world opens up before you. Bathed in the impossible golden rose light of a Greek sunset, stands the Parthenon. It is breathtaking. It is perfect. Its massive marble columns seem to hold up the sky itself. The mathematical precision you learn it about on your first day is all here. But it's not cold or sterile. The architects used subtle optical illusions. The columns bulge slightly. The stalobate curves gently upwards to make the building feel alive, organic, as if it is breathing. For a moment, you forget everything you've learned. You forget the danger, the anxiety, the cruelty. You are simply in the presence of something sublime, a testament to what humans are capable of when they aim for perfection. You walk along, excited, look up at the surviving fragments of the great frieze that once encircled the inner chamber. This is the Bonne frieze, a 160-meter-long marble depiction of the grand procession that took place every 4 years to honor the city's patron goddess, Athena. You see carved figures of horsemen, elders, musicians, and young men and women carrying offerings. It is a portrait of an entire community, idealized and unified in a moment of civic piety. It shows a city at peace with itself and its gods. But you know better now. You know that beneath this beautiful, harmonious surface lies the world of the Kyrios and the Gyneseum, the world of Helen's blame and Medusa's curse. The frieze shows the city as it wanted to see itself, not necessarily as it was. You turn your gaze to the other major temple on the Acropolis, the Erechtheion. It's a strange, asymmetrical, but beautiful building, and on its southern porch, you see them, the Caryatids, 6 stately maidens, carved from marble, taking the place of columns, their sculpted heads effortlessly bearing the weight of the porch roof. They are beautiful, they are strong, they are serene, and they are prisoners. They are a perfect, poignant metaphor for the role of the beautiful woman in this world, an object of admiration, celebrated for her grace, but ultimately a decorative load-bearer, frozen in eternal service to a structure designed and built by men. You heard a legend that when one of them was taken away to a foreign museum centuries later, the remaining 5 could be heard weeping in the night. It's just a story, but standing here, it feels true. This entire complex, the Parthenon itself, is the subject of a deep and ongoing scholarly debate. Was it primarily a temple, a house for the colossal gold and ivory statue of Athena, or was it something else? Some historians argue that it functioned more as a magnificent treasury, a symbol of Athenian imperial might and a storehouse for the wealth extracted from its subject allies. It lacked a central altar for public sacrifice, a key feature of most Greek temples. This debate over its true purpose, is it a house of God or a monument to man's power and wealth, seems to summarize your entire journey. Everything here has a double meaning. Beauty is both divine and dangerous. Love is both a gift and a curse. A temple is both a sacred offering and a political statement. The sun touches the horizon now, and the sky is on fire. The marble around you seems to absorb the color, glowing with a warm, internal light. You look out over the city, now sinking into shadow. You see the hill of the Areopagus, where the court that acquitted Phryne once met. You see the sprawling outline of the Agora, where Socrates questioned the young men and where Aspasia was slandered. You see the labyrinth of streets where a woman's safety was a fragile, contingent thing. You have walked through the myths, the laws, the philosophies, and the fears of this world. You have seen how a society that worshiped beauty could also be profoundly terrified of it, especially when it resided in a woman. The legacy of that fear, you now know, is long and dark. But here, in this last moment of light, you can hold both truths in your mind. The breathtaking genius and the breathtaking cruelty. The beauty of the Parthenon and the silent burden of the Caryatids. The light of reason and the darkness of blame. The day is done. Your journey is over. The air grows cool. It is time to descend from the world of the gods and heroes, back into the quiet of the night. The last rays of the sun have faded from the marble. The brilliant sky has softened into a deep, velvety indigo, and the first few stars begin to appear, sharp and clear in the dry air. The wind that whispers around the ancient columns seems to be telling stories far older than the ones you have heard tonight. It is a quiet, hushing sound, a sound that says the day's arguments are over. The debates have fallen silent. The city below is now a glittering carpet of distant lights, its sharp edges and hard truths dissolving into the gentle darkness. Let the memory of those sun-baked streets and shadowed porticos begin to drift away now. The voices of the philosophers, the poets, and the angry gods are fading, becoming a low, indistinct murmur, like the sound of a river in a faraway valley. You can feel the weight of your own body, safe and comfortable where you are. Feel the soft pressure of the pillow, the gentle weight of a blanket. The hum of the fan is no longer a fan, but the soft, steady breathing of the sleeping world around you. You are no longer on the hard stone of the Acropolis. You are floating in a calm, quiet harbor. The long journey is complete. The ship of this story has come to its final, peaceful rest. There is nothing left to do now, nothing left to analyze or fear. There is only the gentle, rhythmic tide of your own breath, pulling you slowly, softly, out into the deep, quiet sea of sleep. Let the current take you. Let the last vestiges of thought dissolve like sea foam. There is only peace here. There is only rest.